Yeah, you made it back. Maybe you got coffee. Thank you. You're my favorite student today, Jackie.
I'm sorry?
You're my favorite student today.
Oh, yeah. The newer class. And I'm like, this would have been awesome if we had this before we started. But we weren't invited to these when we started.
Welcome, Robert.
And she makes the presentations too short. Like, give us more in-depth information. Like, give us real life case studies. Yeah, because like she makes these presentations that end up being 10 minutes long, and it's just like, okay, there's no way that you secure 15 minutes just for Q&A. Exactly. Like, this is why every Q&A in the other classroom I have one overall is like.
And it wasn't clear at all.
I think it was hard, and that guy was here on Thursday, advice, because I'm like, honestly, you guys need to tell people, like, when you start like with the interview studying process. Because like, have you purchased that book that we have in January?
Okay, good morning, class. We're going to go ahead and get started. How is everyone? Happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday.
Nice day today, finally sunny. Nice. So, we're missing a lot of people. I guess people got scared away. Okay. So today is going to be kind of an easy day. We have this extra day. We're going to get back to our regularly scheduled classwork next week, and we'll go through our regular React. So today, first of all, I wanted to make sure everyone is caught up on last week's assignment, last week's homework, the Mongo scraper. No?
That's due today.
That's due today, right, Jonathan? Right. That is due today. So how are we doing with that?
It'll get done.
It'll get done. I mean, as always, you guys can get extensions and stuff. You just probably don't want to get too far behind. But you guys know what you have to do with that? Is there anything that you're not clear on that we didn't go over? Do you want to do another exercise from that thing? Or you guys pretty much know what you have to do? It's pretty straightforward. You have all the soft examples and stuff. So I think you guys should. Any questions on that at all?
I'll probably have questions once I get to the going to Heroku.
Yeah, so
that's where the issues lie.
Do we have instruction? Is there like a printed typed instructions for MongoLab? Anyway.
Yeah, that would help greatly.
Yeah, okay, we'll look for that, and if there is, we'll slack it out.
Yeah, and like it's just migrating the database.
MLab, it's called MLab. It used to be called MongoLab, now it's called MLab. That's the database service that you'll use that connects to Heroku. And again, you go to your Heroku admin on the Heroku website, and you just add that plugin to it. Then it will connect with Heroku. It sets an environment variable for your server host name and port and all of that stuff and password. So it just connects that way. Yeah, you can follow their documentation on their site. It shouldn't be that hard. You just have. It's a lot like what you guys did with PHP. Okay.
PHP.
With, I mean, MySQL. Sorry. Sorry,
That's because some
MySQL.
of us use PHP my admin.
Yeah, I meant to say MySQL. The two things are like linked in my head because I used to use PHP and MySQL together, I guess. So okay. So if we're good with that, I want to move on to React. I was hoping we could just start with a video on React. I'm going to try to find a good one. Welcome, Melvin. So let's try this. Something. Intro to React. That's going to be Tuesday. That's like Tuesday's class. So Siobhan wanted to make this do like part of Tuesday's class today and stuff, but I think it might make sense just to take this extra day to watch videos and talk about React, talk about anything that we missed, and then do the scheduled classwork the way that it's scheduled. I think it makes more sense to do it that way. Yeah, so this looks like a pretty good one. I think this is.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. This mic thing is really weird. I'm not used to mics. I just hear echoes everywhere. How does my voice sound? Awful? It's good? Great. Cool. Welcome to Facebook. Thank you all for coming out. I'm Tom Okino. This is Jordan Walk. So we're going to get started here as long as everybody's all settled in. Does everybody have a beverage or whatever? Feel free to get up in the middle if you have to and get some more beverages and snacks. So again, I'm Tom Okino, and today we're going to talk a little bit about a JavaScript framework we built at Facebook called React. And the whole purpose of this framework, or the reason that it came about, is because there's a lot of internal discussion in various teams and everywhere else about how should we structure JavaScript applications? And more specifically, how should we structure JavaScript applications that run in a web browser? And there's a ton of different answers to this question. And some of them are up here on the screen, okay? There's a lot of JavaScript frameworks that try to answer that exact question. How should we structure our JavaScript application? These frameworks have allowed us to kind of move forward as a platform. Like the web can actually now build real apps. Like you can build things that feel good now. Most of them, they have this consensus. The consensus is that MVC is the right way to do this, And it's not just MVC, right? It's, model view view model. And it's, as Angular calls it, it's model view whatever, right? But all of these architectures and frameworks have one thing in common, and that's models, right? So models are the primary way that these applications they're at the heart of all of these different frameworks that I showed on that crazy slide, right? Typically, models in these frameworks, they're basically just observable objects, right? And an observable object has some events API that allows you to subscribe to changes on that object. Is this kind of familiar to everyone? We've all kind of seen this. Everybody's nodding their heads. Yes, you've all played with this, right? And basically what happens is developers set up these bidirectional data bindings that allow you to subscribe to changes on your model such that whenever something changes, you can mutate or update your view, right? So familiar concept, nothing new here. And this observable model pattern, it actually encourages mutation. Because what you do is you render something initially, and then in contrast to what we have been doing, which is we read the database every single time we need to see the information. So we haven't been doing anything. Information's been changed on the back end, do something like that, right?
Yeah. So
we did that with Firebase, but we haven't done it with Mongo.
Okay, so let's disambiguate a bit. First of all, there's the front-end architecture, and then you have your back-end architecture. So what we're talking about here is front-end architecture. So everything is on the front end. This is when you've gotten the data via JSON or via however you have it. Then on the front end, you can also store it in models. So what this is talking about is how do we make a single-page web app? First of all, let's ask this question. What is a single-page web app? Or SPA, as people say, single-page application. Have you guys all heard that term before? It doesn't refresh. Yeah, let's hear another definition. Anybody else? Doesn't branch out to another page. You don't have to leave the page. So basically, it means a page that has a lot of rich functionality on one page. In the old days of web pages, each page would basically be separate, and you go from one page to another, and each page is pretty much static, or maybe there's a small amount of interactivity on each page, like a drop-down menu. So we've gone from that to web pages that behave a lot more like desktop applications, where they do a lot of different stuff on one page. You have pop-up windows, you have tooltips, you have a whole bunch of different interactions, drop-down menus, you have little sliding widgets where you slide through stuff. So your pages have a whole lot of interaction on one page. So the question then became for people, how do we manage all of this interaction? We can use jQuery to build the interaction, and that's fine, and it allows us to do that stuff really, really quickly. So if my boss would come to me and he'd say, hey, we need like a slider widget that shows photos with captions, and when you mouse over it, it'll show the caption bigger or something. Can you build this for me? I'd say, yeah, sure. And I'd go and I'd write some jQuery code. I'd have it put in some HTML. I'd have it write some CSS, do some stuff, and it would look good, and everything would be fine. The problem is this isn't scalable, right? As you keep adding more and more features and more stuff, it gets really convoluted. As we've seen, there's a million ways to skin a cat with jQuery. You can write things all different ways. So maybe one time you wrote it one way, maybe one time you wrote it another, maybe one time you had an intern in who did it their own way. So it all gets kind of jumbled together, and it becomes very hard to maintain. So for this reason, people decide to start adding more structure and architecture to the way they architect their front-end web apps, which is what we're talking about here. So they tried bringing in the same type of model view controller patterns that people use for the back end, where you'd have a data model where you would keep all the model or all of the data for the information you're displaying on your front end, for like, for example, the URLs for all the photos, the captions for all the photos. All that stuff would be kept in a data model.
Like an order menu, be all one page.
Or like an order menu, so all that stuff gets kept in a model, then when you need it, you have a controller that goes to the model, it performs the necessary transformations, gets all the data ready to display, and then you have a view layer that displays it. And there are different sort of permutations on this pattern, as he was saying. Angular uses model view model, which is another architecture that came from Microsoft and Silverlight, which is sort of similar but not the same, and then model view whatever is sort of them just making fun of themselves, I guess, because even they don't know what they're talking about. So that's basically where we are with this. So,
For raising the question, the back end is not alerting our front end of changes that happen to our data.
no, that's what basically all we're talking about here is stuff that's happening on the front end. Like what happened with Firebase, where you have WebSockets, where if a change gets made from the database, that gives you a push notification through WebSockets. That's something different. That's not what we're talking about here. When we talk about model view controller, we're talking about everything on the front end, your data model on the front end after the data gets sent to the front end via JSON. Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah? Okay. We're going to continue watching. I like this video because it's sort of high level and he's talking about high level architecture stuff. A lot of videos you'll find on React are more about like how do you install React, how do you set up the packages, all that kind of stuff. And we'll get into that. But as you guys know, I like being sort of high level, getting the bird's eye view of how all the systems are working together. So let's keep watching this and then we can talk about what
As your data changes, you like mutate the thing that you just rendered. And the key word there is mutation, right? But mutation is complex. And, you know, at Facebook, it's starting, God, it's got to be about 2.5 years ago, maybe even more. Starting with our chat rewrite, we wanted to kind of make things simpler, right? We wanted to minimize the amount of mutation that developers had to deal with. So, you know, let me show you what I mean by that. Here's the structure of a simple application. One thing you'll notice is that all updates in this entire system go through a single channel. They all flow in one direction. Let's call this one-directional data binding, right? All of these updates that come through the system, whether it's from user input, real-time updates from the server, the initial payload, the initial data that came in from the server, all those updates go through a single flow, and then they eventually get down to our views here. And this is the
made one-directional data flow, and this is sort of the defining philosophy, if you will, of React, that you should have a one-directional data flow. The sort of defining philosophy of Angular is something called two-way data binding, which means, like, a simple example of this is if you have a form where you're updating your user information for your user profile, and then it shows your user profile on the right. So if I change my name to like Jonathan with an H, it'll automatically show up over here on the right where it shows the information without having to do anything. If you're using jQuery, you'd have to bind an event. So when the field value changes, then we'll go and update the text value of some HTML element over here on the other side. The whole philosophy of Angular was it will do that for you. It will do this thing called two-way data binding. The folks at Facebook, right, what we want is one-directional data flow, because if you have two-directional data flow, things get really confused. We need to have our widget on the right with the chat people that shows you which people that you chat with on Facebook are online now. That needs to talk to some other widget over here on the left. And so there are all these different widgets, all these different components of the site that need to talk to each other and work together. And when you have data flowing two ways, it gets really confused. So Facebook came up with this idea of one-directional data flow, where all of the data basically flows from the server and then updates the state of the components. And we'll get into talking about state a little bit later. That's another philosophy, which is very, very important to React. Basically, that you have components, and then the components can have a given state. Like, for example, you could have a sound control component, and the state of the sound control will be what level you keep the volume on. And it will keep track of that state for you, so that way when you refresh the page, it will keep track of where you had the volume at. It'll automatically refresh that component to set the volume to be right at the right level, so you can see where the volume is set, and all of that. And that information for, say, what level the volume is at will flow one way from your web server into your application to that volume control component. If there's another thing on your page that also controls the volume or shows what level the volume is at or something, that state information will flow one directionally into that component as well. So they will never need to talk to each other. All the data about state flows in one way, which they found solved a lot of problems for them because they were having a lot of problems and a lot of bugs where the components were not communicating with each other correctly. So something would change in one component and then it wouldn't update in the next. Welcome, Nelson. So yeah, we'll get back to watching this.
The piece as a front-end engineer, this is the piece that I care the most about. I care about the user experience and building the things that the user's actually looking at and touching. And the simplest way conceptually that we've found to build views, to build this piece, is to just basically avoid mutation altogether. And you're thinking to yourself, like, what? Wait, what? You need to update things, right? But instead, what we found is that if you could just, anytime your data changes, if we could just blow away our view and just re-render the thing from scratch, like that would be so much easier, right? It would make your application, the structure of your application and the amount of code that you have to write, because you could describe what your view looks like and then never worry about updating it. It's just like, okay, when my data changes, I'll just blow it away and re-render it. But like, does that work? In the browser, it seems like that would be prohibitively expensive, right? That we all know the DOM is slow, and I feel like that's going to be like really, memory expensive and just slow. It's not going to be performant. And additionally, like if the user is typing into a text box and then some comment changes right around that thing and you try and blow that away and re-render, it's like you're going to lose their state. Maybe there's some internal state that you're not even showing, you're not even displaying to the user, but you're going to blow all that away, right? So conceptually, we still want this model, though. From a developer standpoint, we want to be able to say, OK, anytime anything changes, we're just going to start over. We're just going to blow everything away and re-render from scratch. But we want to do it in a way that's actually performant and actually provides a good user experience, right? So the solution that we came up with internally is called React. And our tagline here is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces, because that's basically what it is. We want all the good parts of a complete re-render, that blowing it away thing I talked about, but without the downsides, which is basically the performance and some negative user experience side effects.
So let's talk about this for a second. Does everyone understand sort of what he's talking about here? Basically, he's saying data needs to flow into our components, and then we want to update them. And in order to get everything updated, it's hard to keep track of where everything is at a given time in order to set it to what it needs to be, if it needs to be set, and do nothing if it doesn't need to be set. So he's saying the easiest thing is just to blow everything away and re-render your whole page, set up all of the UI components again. And if we're doing pretty small pages, like for our personal projects and stuff, usually this approach works fine. However, if you have a professional production quality site like Facebook that has really, really rich functionality and all kinds of things, all kinds of business rules, all kinds of things that are constantly being updated and changing, this causes all kinds of problems. It's just prohibitively expensive. Like you said, it works way too slow, basically. So what they did instead was they came up with this concept called the shadow DOM. Has anybody heard that before? Jackie, would you like?
It's a virtual DOM.
Or a virtual DOM. Yeah, you can call it a virtual DOM too. Can you explain what it is, Jackie?
Yeah, sorry. I'll grab my notes so that I can speak eloquently and whatever. Anyway, the virtual DOM is an abstraction of the DOM or a representation of it. The benefits is that it's cheaper, it's quicker, rather than the page having to recycle or refresh, excuse me. And then you don't need to render the entire DOM, just a specific section of the DOM. So,
Right. So do you guys remember how when we were doing jQuery stuff, we would make an element and then we could append elements to it? And I said it's not appended to the DOM yet. It's just floating out in space. Does anybody remember that, how we were doing that? So that's just basically how the virtual DOM works. The main bottleneck of updating your UI in your web page is when your JavaScript engine is talking to your HTML and CSS layout engines. These are all three totally separate pieces of software within your web browser. They're not all a part of the same thing, but they do talk to each other. And the way that they talk to each other is a bottleneck. So you can set up your whole DOM structure in your JavaScript engine. You can make the changes to it in your JavaScript engine and then only send the changes to the HTML parser and the layout engine once. This saves a lot of time in parsing and setting up your web page. It is on the order of milliseconds usually, but those things add up. So Facebook found a way to avoid this bottleneck of basically the JavaScript engine talking to the layout engine, where they do all of the changes. They figure out all of the changes they need to make in the JavaScript engine, in JavaScript. Then they keep track of all the changes in JavaScript. Then when they figure out there is a change to make, then and only then do they go make the how that works, sort of. So you have your layout engine and then your JavaScript engine. These are two distinct parts of your browser that talk to each other, but they can only talk to each other so quickly. There's a bottleneck there. Then when you make a change to the HTML, your layout engine has to go and figure out what is all the CSS, how does that change all the elements around it, how is it positioned, does it have drop shadow, does it have a border, all that stuff, right? All that takes time for it to figure out. So this is a smart way that they figured out to get around that bottleneck. Does everyone sort of see how that works? Questions on that? Jackie, can you help your classmates explain more?
honestly, you guys, just from a personal standpoint, as somebody who really struggled, and I know Jonathan know this, I struggled a lot with jQuery, and for me, I'm an advocate of vanilla JavaScript, but whatever. But the beauty of React is that it can be either your entire page or sections, what they refer to as the components of the page. It never really touches a DOM, but it's more of a virtual DOM, like Jonathan was saying. So if you just wanted to affect a form, or if you wanted to affect a photo, you can do that with the state and the properties that we'll talk about later, and we'll learn together later, and do that just in sections of it. It's really dynamic, and it's a really, really, really great framework to use.
Okay. Does everyone feel good about this?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, we're going to get into listening.
Conceptually, your application can be a lot simpler because, again, we never need to worry about going from state A to B, or A to C, or B to D. You just worry about going from 0 to rendered. Okay?
Basically blow away your changes every time, but you don't have to pay the price for blowing away your changes every time, because it figures out behind the scenes what it needs to change and what it doesn't. So you're just changing it to this state, from whatever it's at to the state that you want it to be, and you're doing it in the simplest possible, least expensive way.
And you know what? Sorry, Jonathan, to jump in, but when Jonathan says state, that means your data. So just always, when he's referring to the state of the site, it's where your data lives. So always think of it, for me, that was really easier, just to think, okay, the data lives in the state, and that's what I'm going to be affecting.
Right, so think of it this way. You could have let's go back to my example of the volume control. The volume control thing would be a component, like this. This thing here would be a component, right? This is the volume control. Now let's say it's at 75%. That's the state of it, is 75%. So it will keep track of this state. If I refresh the page, the volume is still going to be at 75%. This little dot is still going to be 3/4 of the way across. Does that make sense in terms of what a component is? Now, if I had another thing that used volume, it would keep track of it in another place, and it would use that same state. So the states don't talk to each other, but they flow one directionally into the components. And let's keep watching, and this stuff will start to make more and more sense to you guys. This is all totally new to you, which is why I'm really glad we have this extra day to talk about it and go over it. So it will seem strange at first, but just
At the heart of React are what we call declarative components, or just components for short. Again, and I'm going to harp on this, and Jordan will actually talk about this a bit as well. Describe what your component looks like at any point in time. Okay? This is more than a template, though. This isn't just, invoke some function that returns a string, and that's what my thing looks like. Because in that case, we would need to literally blow everything away and set the inner HTML of some node to be some new inner HTML. Components are actually reusable APIs that encapsulate a bunch of different stuff. It's the markup. It's what the thing looks like. It's how the thing functions. It's the behavior. It's the CSS, the JavaScript, how the thing is structured and everything. And it hides the implementation details from the clients, from the people who are actually using these components. Let me give a concrete example. We all know how to make an input in HTML. Well, if you know how to make an input in HTML. We should be able to make an interactive component like a type-ahead, which is just an autocomplete search box, with the exact same type of code, right? Very declarative. I need a type-ahead here, give it some attributes, describe how it works. And then, as a developer, I should be done. I shouldn't have to actually wire up events. I should be able to just drop this component into my page, and then it works. So, another feature of React is that we don't have any explicit data binding. So everyone nodded their heads earlier when I said, oh, you wire your view up to your model, and when things change, then you update your view. But in React, we don't have explicit data binding. Now, frameworks today are getting a lot better at this, and they have what's called declarative data binding. So if you're familiar with something like AngularJS, what's really nice there is you don't actually have to wire up your view to your model. You just say which properties of your model you want to use in your view, and then as the model changes, your view will be updated, which is really nice. But implementation-wise, behind the scenes, it's doing the exact same thing. It's doing this data binding where it manually or automatically wires up your view to that model. And React doesn't use this. So if it doesn't use data binding, how does it work, right? So let's talk about two things. One, how are things initially rendered? And then two, how do updates happen? Because those are the two important pieces. So every framework, regardless of how the implementation works, they're going to provide you with some way to get your initial user experience onto the page. They're going to provide you with some way to generate markup or DOM nodes or whatever, inject that markup into the document, and then wire up your events, your interactive pieces that the user can kind of play with. In React, we just define one render function. And the purpose of this render function is, again, keep harping on this, to describe what your component looks like at any point in time. So this render function that you provide, it doesn't return a string. It returns a representation of your view. And what we do is, since components can compose other components.
So does anybody understand what that means? It doesn't return a string, it returns a representation. Well, first of all, what is a render function?
Okay, so which question?
Yeah, let's answer the second one first. What is a
What's
render function?
a render function? It's
Yeah.
a function that returns.
It returns your view. So a render function is a
Some
function that returns a view for your component. Like say you have, let's go back to using the volume control example, right? Say I have my volume control component. It's basically displaying one piece of information, which is what is my volume right now, right? So say the volume's at 75%. So 75% is the one piece of data that we're passing in, and then maybe we have just a little box and a span tag that says 75%, and you put a percent sign after it. So you would have a function that has a percent sign after it, puts it in a span tag, and returns it, right? So that's the first part. So then what does he mean when it says it doesn't return a string, it returns a representation of the
Did they abstract it out into an object?
They make it into a virtual DOM. So it's intended to be virtual DOM nodes that work with the virtual DOM. So that span tag that I'm putting the 75% in would be a virtual DOM node that then interacts with the virtual DOM. Then it figures out what actually needs to update in the real DOM, and then it goes and makes those changes and only those changes to the real DOM in the most efficient way possible.
We recursively call render to build up this hierarchy, this recursive hierarchy that is an exact description of your component at any point in time. So then when we want to actually generate the markup for this thing for the first time, we take that representation, we iterate over it, we generate a string. It's a big string of markup. And then we inject that string into the document. What's really interesting about generating a string for this thing is that we do something called two-pass rendering. So what I mean by two-pass rendering is we generate that string, and then later, after that string is injected into the document, we attach the event handlers at the top level using event delegation.
Okay, did everyone get that part? The two paths. So the first one is we have our volume control. We go and we figure out what needs to be updated in our HTML. Then we'll inject this string of HTML into the HTML. So now our volume control is in the page, right? Then on our second pass, we need to attach the events. So when we attach the events, they found out that it's cheaper. It makes your page faster if you attach your events to a higher DOM node and then delegate them down to our volume control DOM node. So we might attach it to the body or an inner div that's right inside the body, and then it's going to be delegated down to that volume control DOM node. You guys all remember how that works, right?
How we did the listeners back on that GIF homework assignment?
Yeah, similar to how we did the listeners on the GIF homework assignment. You guys were attaching your event listeners directly to the GIFs, and then when they got blown away and you added in new GIFs, what would happen? The listeners wouldn't work anymore, right? So we learned about event delegation. We attach the events to a higher node on the page, and then you have it listen for the lower DOM node. So you would attach it to the container for your GIFs, and then have it listen for an event on the GIF image itself, or the link tag that wrapped around it, right? You remember how that works?
Yeah.
Okay, everyone clear on how that works? Okay.
This has some really interesting, or exposes some really interesting possibilities. If you're generating your string completely separate from where you're hooking up your events, you can render on the server if you want. You can render in a web worker if you want. And we actually already built server-side rendering into React, the exact same.
Does anybody know what a web worker is, or a service worker? This is a new feature of HTML5 that allows you to have scripts running in the background even when the page closes, which can be bad because people use it for trackers and all kinds of things like that. So it's good to clear your service workers whenever you can. They used to be called web workers. Now, in the past year or so, they're more commonly referred to as service workers. One thing that I've been using them for recently is notifications. Have you guys all seen notifications that pop up, like from Facebook or other things? So that's one thing service workers work with. It opens up a WebSocket thing and basically keeps it open in the background, and then when somebody likes your post or whatever, it will show you the nice notification. So that's what that is.
Code that we use to generate the client-side components can be run on the server, and string is generated. The user sees it immediately. Your events are hooked up as soon as JavaScript is ready, and then everything works. So that's just the initial render, though. Let's talk about how updates happen, because that's the more interesting piece, right? Anyone, with any templating language can build that initial render and inject something that the user can see, and they can probably even do it on the server with compiled templates. But updates are the more interesting piece. We talked about not having data binding. So, how does React actually update your views? Well, instead of mutation and instead of updates, we use a process we call reconciliation. And the purpose of reconciliation is to keep your UI up to date and fresh, as we say, as your data changes. It automatically updates your views and updates your DOM, your representation of your component, as your data changes. And you're all like, everyone's skeptical. If you're not skeptical, you're probably sleeping. It's just, that shouldn't work, right? That's a really hard problem. But if you remember that render function that we talked about that does the initial rendering, remember it returns a representation of what our component looks like at that point in time. So this is pretty cool because what we can do is we can call render and get a representation. And then when something changes, we can call render again and get another representation. And then we compare them. We literally, in JavaScript, compare what the two representations look like and find all the differences. So we compute this minimal set of differences from those two objects, and based on those differences, we batch up a bunch of DOM mutations and update your views in the minimum set of DOM mutations possible. So in order to show you what some of that code actually looks like, because this is kind of hand-wavy at this point, You should see it for real. I'm going to pass off to Jordan. He's going to actually show some code samples. Yeah.
All right, so here's the simplest example of a React component. Is this mic on? Good. Here's the simplest example of a React component. In this case, we're instantiating a React component, and we're instantiating the simplest React component that ever exists, the div component. And we're injecting into that a span component. So this is just the JavaScript API for React usage. And so all the attributes here that we pass a div, they mirror the attributes that you would use on HTML nodes. And the second argument here, separated by the comma, is a list of children that you're passing into the div, and we're passing that span in there. Span has no attributes, so it's set to null, but it does have a text child with hello world. And so to get this onto the page, we invoke React.render component, passing in that instance.
Everyone see how this is working? We're basically, we have a message. We want to show the message, right? So we're constructing our message. We're using react.dom.div. Can anyone guess what that does? It creates a div in the virtual DOM, right? And then we're going to pass in an object. Can anyone guess what these properties do? Class name, on-click. Right, the class name is going to be the class name. The on-click is going to be what? The on-click event, right? Then we're passing in an array of more DOM nodes, right? So can anyone guess what this is going to do? React.dom.span. It's going to create a span tag inside the div tag, and then we're giving it null for the first thing, meaning there's no class, there's no on-click, nothing like that. And then what's this hello world is going to be what? That's the text of the span, right? And then we're just calling React.render component. We pass a message as the first argument, and document body is the second. Can anyone guess what this part is doing here? It's adding it to the DOM in this special magical way that it has, where it only updates the stuff that it needs. Oh yeah, and one more thing, we're going to be using something called JSX, which makes this templating easier, because it's kind of annoying to have to go react.dom.div, react.dom.span. So what JSX does is it gives you a structure that's more kind of like handlebars or HTML, where if you want a span tag, you just type a regular span tag, but then you can intermingle some JavaScript.
Provides a platform for your HTML and your JavaScript to communicate with.
Yes, very well said, Jack.
Can I say
It
something
provides,
about that?
did everyone get that? It provides a platform.
For your JavaScript and your HTML to communicate with each other.
It provides a platform for your HTML and your JavaScript to communicate with each other. Everyone knows it down.
Are you making fun of me?
No, go ahead, Jack.
No, but just some couple things though, you guys, when you look at render is immutable. So when he was talking about firing it is an immutable method, so you can't change it. Another thing, when you're doing your events for React, they're in line. So when you're going to write them, they're always going to be in line with the function that you want to put on the page.
Wait, say that again.
The events,
Yeah.
because they're considered synthetic events.
Right, so they're synthetic events, meaning that they get managed by the virtual DOM. So you always have to put them when you put them on the page. You cannot attach an event like this on-click event with some function. You can't attach that to this after, is what she's saying, because that's not how the virtual DOM works. So we need to attach our events when we are attaching the component. However, the events aren't really as important as you would think, because the state gets updated automatically. We'll see how that works.
That we created. So this is a lightweight description, like Tama was saying, of the user experience. What's up?
Span files be like another React node, or does it have to use text?
Absolutely, it could be arbitrarily deeply nested component instances, and even higher level components like type ahead, and I'll get to that in a second. All right, so here in the center, like I was saying, we have these lightweight divs and spans. And you know, if you pay attention to the API, React is a JavaScript first paradigm. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Because JavaScript is powerful, it's flexible, it's a language you already know. And you're able to represent interactions and logic that are just really hard to do in other more constrained languages like templating syntaxes. And so a lot of other frameworks are kind of going along the same lines and letting you define your entire UI in JavaScript alone. And I think that's really powerful. But there's one thing about JavaScript that ends up kind of like getting in the way as you build these really, like you were saying, like deeply nested components. As you start paying attention to these braces here, and you see like 20 rows of like curlies, and you don't even know which one corresponds to the other one. Maybe you have to get some like Vim like syntax plugin that'll match the colors. It ends up looking a lot like Lisp. And so what we did at Facebook is we addressed this problem by inventing a new syntax that's still every bit JavaScript, but it's a little more familiar to somebody that has experience with templates or HTML. And so like this is just a very lightweight transform that we apply at Facebook, and it's completely optional, and it's not intrinsic to React. If you were to look at the React source code and like look for how many references to this syntax there are, you would find 0 references to this syntax. But again, this is just compiling exactly into what you would otherwise write in JavaScript. So for the rest of the slides, though, I'm going to show it in what we're calling JSX syntax, just because it's more familiar to us. All right, so the real fun starts when you begin to define your own new composite components, your new higher level components that are consisting of lower level components like the divs and the span. So in this case, we can instantiate it just like we did the divs and the spans. In this one, it's called an action button. It has a text attribute and an on action callback. So these aren't like div attributes, right? This is not class name. This is not on click. This is on action. There are our own synthetic events, their own synthetic properties that we interpret when we define the action button. All right, so let's start defining the action button. A few things here. You must call react.createClass, and this creates a new class that you can instantiate, like a JavaScript class. And you give it a set of methods that you want to provide to this new class. Like Tama was saying, you describe your component using the render function. So our job is just to implement this and describe what our view looks like. Start filling this out here. Oh, so you'll notice that like once you define it, it's like a variable that's in scope, right? You can instantiate it, and that's all that this lightweight optional syntax does here. So if we start to stub this out, we're going to say that our action button is a button with a span and has some text in it. But we want to interpret the properties that are provided to us. We want to interpret this text. We want to place it inside of that innermost span. And so the way that we do that is we refer to these properties that are passed in via this dot props. But it doesn't just have to be strings, right? You can pass anything you want because this is a JavaScript first paradigm. That means that you can pass function handlers in for on action, and you can refer to it the same way that you would refer to strings. And so the buttons on click is our action buttons on action. And it might help you to just kind of think of this as like a way to like route this data into the implementation of your component. And so you see these arrows here saying, I'm going to stick the text inside of the span and the handler inside of the on click of the button.
Okay, let's stop.
But React is
compressed for a second. So what's happening here? We have a component. It has properties, right? So this is a good time to define properties versus state. Can you define this?
Yeah. So properties in React, so a couple ways to look at it. It's the way we get data into a component which we want to display on the web page. So again, think dynamic. You have to use your curly braces when referencing in a variable and an object to access the property in a component tag. You want to keep on going?
Yeah, so basically you have properties. Properties are the bits of dynamic data that you will show in a component. Like, for example, a property could be like the volume in our volume control example, right?
And also, too, like a good way to think about it is like in your anchor tag, the href, how you are defining the href and the anchor tag, that's similar to a property or source tag when you're working in HTML.
Right. So I think are all properties state, but not all, or no, all states are a property, but not all properties are state.
All properties have state.
Yeah. So all properties. No, I think something can be a property without having a state as well.
Yes, you're right about that.
But anyway, this is getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Basically, we have properties. We're going to want to show bits of dynamic data inside of our components, and we do this by setting them as properties. So the properties can have a state, which is maintained. So for example, we want the volume control to stay at 75% unless I change it to something else. So that would be the state. But the property is the volume, I believe. So let's keep.
It's more than just about routing. So you can perform any transformation you want on this data.
So it has to be
Yeah, in the JSX syntax, yeah, the property or any dynamic data that you're displaying goes inside of curly brackets, and that's how you're disambiguated from the rest of the HTML. So that's how it knows it's not HTML. Very similar to handlebars, actually, and a lot of other templating.
So that's a JSX thing.
That's a JSX thing. JSX is a templating language very similar to how handlebars is a templating language. It comes with it. By default, JSX comes with React, but you don't have to use it. You can also use a different templating language, like there are plugins to use actually handlebars instead of JSX. If you're really attached to handlebars, you can use handlebars with your React instead. Or you can use Pug, which becomes actually more useful because it's a little bit easier to read. You like Pug?
Data, because this is just JavaScript, right? So you can to uppercase it, you can slice it, you can reverse it, you can do anything you want. So they're actually like really highly powerful transforms. But one thing that may not be clear here that Tom did allude to was that your render function describes your UI at any point in time. So that means that if your text were to change or your function handler were to change, we would figure out the minimal set of DOM mutations needed to carry out that effect. So if your text were to change from book flight to give talk, we would find the span that is affected by that text and only flip the inner text of that span. We wouldn't touch the surrounding div or the surrounding button in the DOM at all.
So here's the important thing to understand about properties. I don't know if you guys caught this. You can have components nested inside other components, right? So we would have one component that's our entire form for booking a flight. And then within that component, we're going to make our book flight button, just the submit button, its own component. So that way, when we use this button component in our book flight form, we'll call it using the action button tag, because that's how JSX works. It includes components inside other components by just using the name of that component in a tag. So putting this tag inside a JSX component would include this action button component within the larger form component. You guys all see how that works? Questions on that? Make sense to everyone? Adrian? Make sense? John, are you following? Okay, cool. Pedro, you good? Questions? Nelson, you good? No? Question? Oh.
Unrelated question, is this.props a property of an object that is returned by calling react.createClass?
This.props is the local context variable for this. So when I'm calling this with the textbook flight, then this.props is the current properties that I'm calling this instance of the component that I'm calling here. So if I put in this action button tag with the textbook flight here, then it will have access to this book flight text here from this.props.text. So the this.props.text is this book flight that I'm passing in here. Does that make sense? So
I saw where you were pointing.
Yeah, right. So this action button gets included in the big form, right? In the larger form component. I'm passing it in this book flight text. So this is the book flight text that I'm passing in here.
Yeah.
This.props.text. Now, if I had another one called this.props.id, I could put in an ID attribute here, and then I could use this.props.id instead of ID on the span tag. Do you see how that works?
Yeah, so basically more on like the mechanical behind the scenes thing. Props is a property of an object that's returned by React.create.
Yeah, so yeah, it sets it to the current.
That's more of what's going on.
Yeah, so this is the contextual this. It refers to the current properties is a property of that, which gives you all of the properties that are being passed into that component that you'll be able to use. So this is how you'll get all of the properties for your components. This is how you'll show the data.
All right, so and then
don't try to get too stuck on like reverse engineering React and figuring out how that stuff works, because they'll beat you at that game. They have a whole army of programmers.
the real fun starts when you start building even higher level components that are composed of these other higher level components. You can start building up your entire app by stacking abstractions on each other. And you get that same reactivity, that same sort of like minimal set of DOM mutations flowing through sets of your application. So if we wanted to find a counter, it already starts to sound a little bit different because it's clearly more higher level. But we still have the same render function. We still have the same React.create class that we had before, but there's something a little bit different here.
Okay, so do you guys see this is a more higher level example? I wish we could see this better.
Yeah, it calls it right when it was.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So, okay. Okay. So this is giving us a more complicated example that has a few methods. So we have a counter component, and this has HTML as we've seen. It has properties as we've seen. But it also has more dynamic methods as well because it has logic that it needs to implement, right? We're going to count stuff every time we count it. We need to do this logic where we're adding 1 to what they call the delta, which is a common thing that you'll see in certain algorithms. But all this is basically doing is adding to the count. So we have a certain algorithm, a certain kind of logic that we're doing. We pass in basically the delta, what was the count at, and then we're just adding the delta to the count. The reason we don't just add 1 to it is because it could have incremented more than 1. It could have been clicked twice or something. So they solved that problem by making it a delta instead of just adding 1. So we want to add to the count, and then we're going to want to get the initial state too, where we go and from our properties get the initial count of it. So then we're implementing, we can not only just implement markup structure and basic information, but you can also encapsulate logic into your components as well. Does that make sense? So maybe instead of just counting 1, you'll have some kind of complicated business logic where you want to multiply something by 3 and then divide it by the thing that it was before or something like that. So you can have all of that kind of logic nicely encapsulated into your components. Does that make sense? Okay, awesome. And then we're setting the initial count of this again at 4. So that way, when we're setting the initial state, we're passing in the initial state that we want our counter to start at 4. Then it will access that 4 property here, and it will know what to start our counter on. You guys see how that's working? Martha, you good? Questions? Oh yeah, I know. This is
Really more higher level. But we still have the same render function. We still have the same React.create class that we had before, but there's something a little bit different here. And again, we're using the action button that we defined before. We had a text and an on action callback. So this counter is going to have a div that's going to display the count, and we're going to have 2 buttons that we previously defined to increment and decrement the count. It's the simplest example ever. And whenever the on action is invoked, we're going to call our member method add to count, passing in 1 or -1 depending on which button you clicked. Okay, but there's something different here, and that is that we have this special method called get initial state. And so a counter has state, right? So with other templating solutions, like it's really hard to model state with these things. And a lot of times it's not a good idea to model state inside of a template, but sometimes it is. Sometimes this internal state is a concern of your reusable component. So if you want your component to be able to sort of take the role of a state machine, you need what every state machine has, and that's an initial state. And so get initial state allows you to define that initial state. We're going to say the count is equal to whatever you specified as your initial count in the properties. Okay, so in the same way that we could represent render as a function of arbitrary properties, we can represent render as a function of arbitrary state. So anytime that our state changes, just like we'll still figure out the minimal set of DOM mutations and only serialize that over to the DOM bridge and only apply those mutations. And you can see that the way that you would modify your own internal state, which are different than properties, is you would just execute the set state method. So what that'll do in this case is it'll set your count to be equal to your current count plus the delta that was supplied. That's clear. All right, so anybody showing you a framework is going to show you the most contrived examples ever, but there's always a way to break out with React. There's a way to break out of the paradigm. And that's really important for somebody like Facebook who's got a very established product with a lot of different technical solutions kind of like munched together. We need a way to be able to break out of the reactive paradigm and tap into existing frameworks, existing markup, existing places on the DOM that weren't rendered using this framework. So we have all sorts of ways to do that. You should check them out. And one thing that you can do is you can like call out your backbone models if that's what you're into. and subscribe to those events and let that inform Reactive that it needs to update an internal state or something.
So this is a pretty cool piece. You can actually use it.
Play Squirrel with others. Yeah, totally. There's some really good examples online of like people integrating with either Angular or with Backbone. But yeah, give it a shot. All right, so Thomas is going to talk a little bit about how we got here and where we want to go with React.
Okay, so this should be good. We'll watch this next speaker and then we can go into it.
I don't think so. Oh, there we go. Okay. So more on that escape hatch, though. This is actually pretty interesting because just yesterday, this guy Pete Hunt, who works on Instagram, he built something that allows you to basically use Angular directives from React. So you subscribe to this one little event, and you basically just say, okay, React.render component. And it allows you to define your component in React and then use it inside of Angular. So this is a really important piece of React, is this interoperability. When we were building the UFI, I mean, this is on my story time slide. When we were building what we call the UFI, which is our comments and likes and everything on Facebook.com, we needed to integrate with a lot of legacy stuff. I mean, first of all, Newsfeed is all rendered on the server. So if we wanted to render all the comments on the client side, first of all, we need some way to interact with like existing DOM, like some existing document. But also, like, we needed the way to take our server rendered components, like the text box that you type into. We needed to be able to embed that inside of this React view, right? So React gave us this like great escape hatch. It's just like, hey, here's your DOM node, do whatever you want with it. And then we were able to actually hook in and instantiate other different legacy components and things like that. So that escape hatch is actually really, really important. Tons of stuff on Facebook is now built on top of this stuff. And like I said, comments and likes, anything on Facebook.com that uses that kind of light blue box where you like something or type in a comment, that's all built on React. On our mobile site, actually, the bookmarks are all built on React now as well. Props to John Watson back there. So this works on mobile really well. We're using this everywhere. We use this for all of our ads interfaces are being built on top of React now. But more interestingly is Instagram. So when Instagram joined Facebook about a year ago, I think it was about a year ago, they wanted to build, one of their first projects was they wanted to build Instagram on the web. And they had some stuff up there, but it was very, very light, right? It was just the permalink pages for photos. So you could basically like view them in a web browser. But they wanted to build like a real feed and real profiles. And so they started building it, and they were using like traditional solutions, things that existed, some client-side MVC. But then a few people started looking into like how we did things at Facebook, and they were like, wow, like this React thing is pretty cool. We want to try and use that. So they came to talk to product infrastructure. They came to talk to me and Jordan. They're like, hey, we kind of want to use that thing over on Instagram.com. And we're like, man, your stuff is on Amazon Web Services. We have all this like proprietary front-end infrastructure that like bundles and packages our static resources and ships things down the wire. I'm like, I don't know. I don't think it's going to be possible. But they really wanted to do it, and we saw utility in doing that. So what we did is we kind of tried to divorce it from our infrastructure. We tried to build it in such a way that you could basically just take React and some tooling and use it anywhere. And in the process of using Instagram as kind of an external client, we set up for Instagram.com to be built completely on React. So if you go to Instagram, the entire thing on mobile, on desktop, everything, it's a responsive site. It's all built using React. And the initial version of this integrated with Backbone models. They basically said, okay, as our Backbone models change, we're going to tell React to re-render. But as they wrote more and more of their views using React, they found that they just started deleting their models. Their code just got smaller and simpler, and their application became very declarative. It's like, this is what Instagram.com looks like. And that was pretty exciting. So after about 18 months of using React internally, some people started to say, man, we should probably start sharing this externally because like no one's doing it this way. So that's when we got the idea to kind of try and open source this thing. And so if you know Facebook, historically we haven't really open sourced much front end stuff. We open source a ton of back end stuff, especially our PHP compiling, our hip hop engine, and a bunch of other stuff, but we haven't really done much with JavaScript. So we decided we wanted to open source this thing, and we actually did that about 3 weeks ago. So React is on GitHub now, and you can go to facebook.github.io/React and read all about it. And this was really great because this kind of acted as a forcing function for us to get like really thorough documentation and examples and to set everything up so that you can kind of get up and running very quickly. Jordan and I and a bunch of other people hang out in Pound React.js on Freenode pretty much every day, all the time. So we encourage you to kind of hop into there and ask questions. Play with this stuff. We want to know what you think. We're pretty humble about this. This is actually just something that works for us. We're excited about it and we're passionate about it, but obviously we're not going to force it on anyone. Let us know what you think. We want to know, if this works for other people and if this, development model is easier. And we're really interested to see like what people build on top of this and what comes next. So with that, thank you. That's all we have for the presentation portion. But now's the fun part, because now we want to answer all your questions, especially from those of you who are skeptical that this would actually ever work. So thank you. Cool. Yeah, I think we have like handheld mics so that because I think we're recording it, right? Yeah, I'll walk around. Yeah. Question? Yeah, go ahead.
What is like so things like animations? When you kind of generate this difference of the initial state or the previous state and the current state, are you doing that like on every single frame of an animation, or
no?
So
no.
So how do you handle that?
Yeah, so that's a great question actually. So for things like animations, it really depends on what type of animation you're doing. If you're doing an animation that can simply be described as adding a class name, so you're changing the appearance of something and maybe changing its state, maybe you're changing the color of something or you're bouncing an icon. Those can be done very, very easily in here by just adding a class name, right? But there are more complex animations where you want to kind of animate something into or out of the document, right? So maybe you remove a comment and then that thing slides out. So what you do in that case is you'd say, hey, as soon as the user interacts with this thing to remove it, we're going to break out of React. We're going to have a DOM node. And then you can animate that DOM node however you want. And whenever you're done with that thing, you say, OK, go ahead, React. And then React will pick back up and like reconcile the same way. We're going to work on adding better hooks for this, though, because it would be much better. It would be much more.
So some of this stuff is a little bit dated, and they have made improvements. It was 20, 30 years ago already. But the core of it is still the same, which I think is a testament to the how well they designed it. That it's still, the fundamentals of it are still pretty much the same, and nothing has really changed because it started out with a very good design philosophy. Compared to React, or compared to Angular rather, which is almost completely different than when it was at version 2 is almost completely different than version 1. Version 3 they decided to skip entirely, and now they're on version 4, which again is so yeah. So React is very well designed. It's overarching kind of thing. It's basically supposed to like fix the web and do everything for you, which is what React kind of tries to do. So I think, Jackie, did you have anything else you wanted to say? You want to show it?
I just think I can't speak enough of it, and I think as developers, what you're going to be able to do with it is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I agree. I'm really excited about React. My experience with React was I first started hearing about single-page application frameworks, like 5 or 6 years ago at the Washington Post. We used Backbone pretty extensively. Backbone is a good one. He mentioned Backbone in this video a few times. React is starting to replace it. What Backbone is it gives you basically an MVC type structure, kind of like I was showing you guys with Require. Backbone does that, only it gives you even more structure. It's even more, so you can manage all of your models, all of the data that comes in via JSON, you manage in models, and then you control the permutations that happen to them in controllers, and then you update them. So we used that at the Washington Post. That was pretty successful. A lot of the projects I would just write a whole bunch of jQuery and make everything work. And it was very unstructured, but I would get everything to work, and I would usually get it done on time, and it would work the way we wanted it to, and that was all we really cared. Philosophy of it, so I didn't use it, but I did go to some meetups, studied it a little bit, sort of saw how it worked. I wasn't crazy about it. Then React started coming out, and I first heard about it because I was learning Clojure, and the Clojure community really liked React. They built Clojure wrappers around React, so you could use React with Clojure. There are a few really good ones. One is called Ohm.next, which I use. But anyway, so that's how I started hearing about React. Then I was working at AARP. So I talked to my boss there. He agreed with me that he didn't like Angular, but he liked React better. So we built out sort of a prototype of the new AARP homepage, which they never ended up using in React. Another developer that was there actually did most of the work on that one. But we found out that it's a really versatile framework. It cuts down a lot on the amount of work that you'll have to do for maintenance and updates and fixing things, and it gives you a much more structured kind of way of doing it. So this is something you guys are going to want to think about when you get freelance clients, when you get professional clients that you work with who ask you to do projects. You'll have to decide sometimes whether or not you want to use a tool like React. Sometimes you'll just get a job at a company that already uses React and they already have a set way of doing things, in which case you'll do things like the way they do it. But there'll also be times when you have to figure out on your own which technologies you want to use. So some things to think about when deciding if you want to use React or not is, first of all, interactives, it has all kinds of different stuff, updates. Then that's where in something like React really comes in handy, because it handles different changes and the way information flows through the application for you. Some really nice structure. Questions? Thoughts, fears, hopes, dreams? Yes.
Is performance slower with React on some of those lower complexity projects?
Yeah, so you have to think there's like a sort of a sweet spot where React becomes relevant or you need it. If you have one drop-down menu and you have to include all of React and all this different stuff, yeah, there you're going to be go down, or if you have one thing, you could write it in jQuery pretty easily. And then the more important thing that you have to think about really is the development time. How long is it going to take you to learn React if you haven't learned it yet, to get everything set up and running and fixed and stuff to make this one little thing when you get it done in 5 minutes. So you kind of just have to weigh the pros and cons and see what makes sense.
Assuming you're pro ability and you're also pro at you're a boss at all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Will a simple site actually be faster to do on, with just jQuery versus?
Yeah, usually it will be to do like a first pass. If you get a project and somebody wants something like quickly and they want it cheaply, like maybe React is not a good solution for that, because you might get sort of pulled into having to use React, and then there's one little thing that's not working in React. And say, how do I fix React and make this one thing work? Where in jQuery it would be a lot more straightforward. So it's more structured. Sometimes more structure will be to your benefit. Other times it won't be. And you basically have to kind of figure out what works for you and be able to make that call. And, the best thing for that is experience, sort of what works for you. Yes.
I was talking to a friend, the developer, and he was telling me that one of the advantages that he sees on React is that you can create your own library of components.
Yeah.
And eventually you're gonna be using those components. So maybe if you've been working on React, you've been creating your component for like 1 or 2 years, and then you're gonna have a comprehensive library of that, and you just add it to your project.
Yeah, I agree with that. Or you could make it an open source library, even share it on GitHub. Yeah, and there probably are some good component libraries already out there for React. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, did everyone hear that? Everyone get that? Okay. Good, thanks, Nelson. What other questions? What do you think of all this, Madison? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay, anyone else? Martha? Nothing? No. Nothing? Not any thought at all in this past hour and a half?
I would love to work on some
Okay.
exercise on that.
Yeah, we will. Our first day technically is Tuesday, so this is like an extra day we get to spend philosophizing and just wrapping our brains around how all this stuff kind of works. But yeah, we'll go and look over some of the exercises in a second. I wanted to hear from some other people. Anyone at all thoughts on React? Mario, what do you think of React?
Seems pretty cool. I mean, it gives you a lot of functionality, especially when you want, like, immediately comes to mind when you want different components to interact with each other.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's really good for is having components that work together and interact with each other. Because if you have a lot of components on your page that need to talk to each other, where if one thing happens in one component, it updates another component, that kind of interaction can become really, really complicated really quickly. And there are more and more possible permutations of the state. So this manages all possible permutations of all states without you having to think about it, which can be really, really powerful for more complicated applications. Anyone else? Melvin, what do you think?
What I follow on with, it's quite useful. Sometimes for some of the things that we've been having to do manually through jQuery, especially with more recent projects.
Yeah, it definitely helps that stuff along. Absolutely, it's really good. Gretel, what do you
What I
think?
see, like when you instantiate each component, you just add the class that any ID you want to add to it right there in the JSX.
Yeah, you add the classes, IDs, events, even the more complicated methods like we saw with that counter where it will either increment or de-increment it based on a delta that you pass to it. You can do all of that kind of stuff.
But just when you're defining them, just be careful because class is a reserved word for JavaScript, so they have their own definitions for your attributes. So I think class is defined as class name.
Yeah,
You can
class
see it.
name,
Yeah.
because
So,
class
yeah, class is reserved for
is
JavaScript.
reserved,
Right.
class was added in ES6.
Yeah. So just those are little stuff that we can stumble on as we're learning this stuff.
Yeah, good, thanks, Jackie.
React Native.
I don't believe that we spend a lot of time on it. We may cover it briefly. However, if you learn React, you'll have the fundamentals you need for React Native, and then you just go read the docs and do it. There are other things. If you can build a React app, there are other ways also to make a native app like PhoneGap. So you can use PhoneGap also to make a app. I haven't looked into React Native that much. I want to do that. I just haven't had a chance to. Do you have any experience with React Native, John?
No, I know the other class that just graduated did React Native, but I don't know how they were about that.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll have time to go over it. I would like to go over it.
We're gonna cover Redux.
Yeah, we will be using Redux. Yeah, that's pretty. Most React apps now actually use Redux. What Redux does, everyone, is it manages state for you. It basically, so before Redux was something called Flux, which worked with React. Flux basically means this idea of one directional flow in your application. We talked about that, right? Everyone gets what that means. The components don't talk to each other directly. The information flows into your application, then it flows out of your application. Or it just flows into your application. So data comes into your application, it updates the state, it updates the UI. Then more data comes in, it updates the state, it updates the UI. That's how it works. Nothing really talks to each other. So this whole concept is called Flux. Redux is a library that was built on top of Flux. There are also other libraries. Netflix built another thing that was similar called Falcor because they also use React, so it does the same thing. What is that from, like a comic or something?
From the Neverending Story.
Oh, that's what that is?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that
They
makes
would.
sense that it would be
Netflix.
Netflix. Yeah. So what Redux basically does is it gives you a way to manage the state where it's stored in a stateful representation. So it basically just stores the state of your component for you. So like if you have that volume control is at 75%, it's going to store that. It's going to remember it. When you refresh the page, it's going to still be there. It handles all of that stuff for you. So the state is persistent. So that's what Redux basically is. It's a library which manages persistent state for React.
Can volume be
Yeah, so the properties get set by the state. So the state of the volume control application is the volume property is at 75%, if that makes sense.
So property is the React name for an attribute then.
Property is, I mean, it depends how you define an attribute, first of all. I mean, attribute has different denotations in different contexts, right?
Or an HTML DOM object or DOM tag.
Yeah, as I say, try to get away from like reverse engineering how it works. Just go with what they just go with the flow of what they tell you to do, because they have a lot of structure and there's a lot of really smart programmers. So a property is basically like a thing in your application. Like if you have a name component and your first name is Sam, then it will say Sam, the first name property. Kind of the same as a JavaScript object where you set the first name property, last name property. Same kind of thing. Sorry, it's not a more direct answer, but like it seems like you're basically trying to like reverse engineer.
Well, that's just kind of how my understanding of stuff works.
Yeah, no, that's good, but as I say, it's like I don't know. It's it's good, but it's bad. Sorry. Okay. What other questions, thoughts, fears, Gretel? We're gonna hear from you. Maria. What is Babel and all this? Okay, so that's a fair question. What is Babel? Babel is a transpiler. It's a transpiler. So what is a transpiler? We've covered this before. Somebody remember? It goes from one language to another. So Babel runs these conversions, these transpilations, which convert from one language to another. Typically, it's going to be from ES6 back to ES4, which runs in the browser. But it doesn't have to be. It could be anything. A lot of times what people will do with Babel is pick out certain transformations that they want to do from ES6 to ES4. Like, for example, if you just wanted to use arrow functions and have it be transpiled to regular ECMAScript 4 functions, it would do that for you. It would take all the arrow functions and it would transform them to regular functions. If you just wanted to use string interpolation and string literals with tick marks, it would do that. You could write all your code with string literals and tick marks, and then it would go and convert them to the old way of doing things, double quotes. That's for browser compatibility's sake. The reason it becomes really important with React is because React uses JSX. So it uses a Babel transpilation for JSX that converts the JSX back into the regular React DOM code that we saw. Okay, does that make sense to you guys? What else? What other questions? So what else besides that, Gretel? Anything else? No? Okay. Jose, what do you think?
I was watching the video, I was thinking all along the same line as Sam, because I'm trying to think of the website functionality for my company, and it's not going to be rich enough to, I think, use React.
Yeah, and that's an important thing to think about. And if you're running a company and you've got a lot of stuff to do, you've got to think about how to manage your time, how to budget your time. So that might not be an efficient use of time.
I like the idea. I like, it like to integrate that kind of technology and stuff. But in fact, depending on what you're doing with your web application.
Right. Yeah. It might. Yeah. So it absolutely might not make sense. So
Right.
That's really important.
That's what I was thinking. Let's see how I can use it the whole time I was watching it.
Yeah. Oh, okay, Mike, what do you think?
Like how they do the virtual DOM.
Okay, cool. Yeah, the virtual DOM thing is definitely pretty cool. Hear from somebody else, Pedro. What do you think about React? Anything at all? How are you doing today?
So where are we right now?
Where are we?
Where are we?
What day is it?
What day is it?
So, I was thinking about jQuery. So this would replace jQuery?
This will replace jQuery if you need your application to do a lot of really fancy stuff on the front end. Like if you need to build a website like Facebook that has a lot of functionality, very feature rich, then it makes sense to learn this. It takes more time to learn it and get started with it, but it will do more things for you and it will make your life easier. in the long run. If you have a very big feature-rich front-end site like Facebook or Instagram or something like that. If you have a site that's simpler, it could be that you might not need it, and you might just want to. I mean, some of you might just want to focus on being back-end developers, really, and you might not need this, but it'll be good for you to learn it just the same, because this is the way the industry is headed in terms of the way people are doing the front end. So it doesn't replace jQuery, but it makes it replaces very big feature-rich applications for jQuery. Yes, Martha. That is a good question. There might be plugins for React that work with SVG, but remember when we talked in this video about the escape hatch, where there are things that you're already doing with your application that don't quite go with the React way of doing it, you can use this escape hatch where you just work with the regular DOM. That would probably be a time to use the escape hatch if you do something with SVGs, although somebody probably has made some type of SVG plugin for React. Since there is a very robust ecosystem for React, it wouldn't surprise me if somebody already made some type of integration. Good question. Thank you. Lucas, any thoughts, feelings? You good? Okay. So let's look at what we have in store for us in this next week.
When they talk about rendering on the server side, they just like render with React.
No, that was separate from React. What they were saying is they had other ways of doing things at Facebook before they started using React that used rendering on the server side. So that's why they needed this escape hatch so that they could make React work with some of the things that were already there that worked in different. Like a lot of times you will render your components on the server side. So a lot of the examples that we've seen with jQuery, we're getting back JSON from the server, and then we use jQuery to put it together into templates. That does take more time. The way a lot of production websites will do it is they would use like Node to put together an HTML template on the back end, and then just send it as an HTML snippet, and then you use jQuery to just put that HTML into the DOM, so you don't have to do the template part.
The virtual DOM is on server side or is on client side?
Client side, yeah. It's on the client side. The difference is that it runs in a JavaScript engine. So in your web browser, you have the JavaScript engine that runs the JavaScript. Then you have the HTML and layout engine that takes care of how to display the page like this, right? It takes all the HTML and all the CSS and it puts it together. It figures out how many pixels one thing is, how many pixels, all those different measurements of pixels and ems and all that stuff. It takes it, it puts it all together. It shows it in the right way. So as I said, there's a bottleneck between the JavaScript engine and the layout engine, right? They only have like this much bandwidth to talk to each other. Layout engine is out here, the JavaScript engine is out here. So this avoids the bottleneck by only passing the really relevant bits of information between the JavaScript engine and the layout engine. So it figures out only the things that it needs to update, and then it goes and updates only those things. So it makes the process a lot more streamlined. Does that make sense?
That code is not visible browser.
The React
When we do
when you inspect the element and stuff.
Oh, no, when you inspect the element, no, you won't see it because it doesn't go into the layout engine. It stays in the JavaScript engine. Yeah, so you'll see it like in the sources tab. If you go and debug your JavaScript code, you can see what's happening there, but it will never make it to the layout engine side of the browser. Okay, so let's do this. Week 19 React. So did you guys review the student guides and video guides and all of that? No? No, I didn't find this video guide very helpful.
I think we can review the student guide because it has relative links to.
Yeah, well, we should have sent out the solved examples though, and you guys followed it.
The React one?
Yeah, so the student guide has those paths, but then we send out the solved examples. So those paths should just tell you where in the student guide folder we send out to look for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, but I don't.
No.
I guess I
You
missed.
post the text, but there's no.
Yeah, so I post the tab. My job is to send you guys the student guides and video guides.
Yeah.
TA's job is to send out the solved examples, which has where. Oh, I thought we were sending out the solved examples at the
Like the
beginning
video
of the
guides
week.
help, but the student guides never help because we don't have access to.
Okay, why don't we send out not the solved examples, all the unsolved examples we send out at the beginning of the week. So I'll send out the student guides and video guides. Jonathan will send out the unsolved examples. So you'll take the student guide and use that as a guide for where to look for stuff in the unsolved examples folder. Does that make sense? Okay.
For the whole week.
Sorry, yeah, for the whole week. Sorry, that's kind of a disjointed process, but that's the way we're doing things. Okay, guys, everyone good with that?
So those videos that you're referring to, are those?
The videos and the video guides are links to
Yeah.
YouTube. Those work fine, just
Those
the
are
way they
external
are.
links.
Okay.
Those are external links to YouTube. The stuff in the student guide are relative paths that you will use to look for stuff in the examples Jonathan sets out. Okay.
Like, remember Sam, we were talking about that?
Yeah. I wanted to know how to set up Mongo, and in the student guide that was sent out, it said click here to get
Oh, yeah.
instructions, and that was not it.
I don't know why they do that. That's weird. That's like meant to work internally with GitHub.
Check out the video.
I watched the video, and the video didn't make any sense because I didn't have Mongo installed.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, I remember that.
All right. So we'll watch this first video, and he's going to show you how to install an npm package and stuff.
Are we gonna be using?
We're going to be creating a basic React app. React can be pretty tricky and hard to understand at first, so don't be discouraged if you don't understand it fully right away. Let's start by looking at what our finished app is going to look like. Okay, it's not much, and you're probably wondering why we're using React for this. React is great for large-scale applications. We're just working our way up right now. Let's start with installing an npm package called Create React App. We're going to want to install this globally. It's a tool to help us set up our React environment. Once we have Create React App installed, we're going to use it. Start by heading into the directory that you want to create the app. Create React App will consolidate everything into a folder for you, so just head to the folder that contains all of your activities. I'm going to be naming my app Solved, so what I'll do is run Create React App Solved. Once that's finished, I'm going to replace the source folder with the source folder from the activity.
Ooh, 1080. Alright, do you want me to go back?
Yeah, now we can
Alright.
Working our way up right now. Let's start with installing an npm package called Create React App. We're going to want to install this globally. It's a tool to help us set up our React environment. Once we have Create React App installed, we're going to use it. Start by heading into the directory that you want to create the app. Create React App will consolidate everything into a folder for you, so just head to the folder that contains all of your activities. I'm going to be naming my app Solved, so what I'll do is run Create React App Solved. Once that's finished, I'm going to replace the source folder with the source folder from the activity. Okay, now let's talk about components and how this is set up. We have a couple of files here. Let's start by opening up index.js. Remember, import is JSX syntax. It's very similar to require. If we do a Google search for import versus require, I really like the second explanation in the first search result. I would highly recommend taking a second to read over this if you are curious about the differences. Now back to the app. We see React DOM.render. Let's talk about this really quickly. What this does is it renders the app component which is imported from app.js to the element with ID root. This root element can be found in the index.html file in the public folder. Let's take a look at that before we move on to the app.js, just so we have an understanding of what is going on. Here, we can change a couple things. We can add Bootstrap or other CSS libraries the way we would normally would with other HTML files. We can also change the title etc., etc. We also see the div ID root. It is the only element in this HTML file. The app component is rendered here in this div. Okay, so let's check out the app component now and see what it's rendering. So app.js renders the hello div component. Why are we rendering a single component within another component? Wouldn't it be easier to just render the one component that actually contains content? Yes, but we're learning to build the components and the relationships. We're using the index.js to render the component to the page, and we could have easily just built our application in app.js. But most of the time, app.js will include multiple components. App.js will be...
I think your boss. What is your guy? Wes Boss?
Wes, he's the man.
Yeah, I think he's
love
better
him.
than this guy. Maybe not better than
And
me.
he's
but-
just
Yeah, all of the Trilogy video instructors, like, need to have, like, they all have the same monotone voice.
Yeah, it's
for
not
Lisa
really
Meadows, who
like.
has the worst vocal fry ever. Yeah, I can't listen to her talk. It's like nails.
Wait,
Trilogy
who?
instructor?
Yeah.
What is her name?
Everybody, this is Lisa Meadows.
What is her name? Lisa Meadows?
She has the worst vocal fry.
No, which video is she in?
Lisa, what's her name?
Battle. Hey,
Lisa
everybody.
Battle.
This is Lisa Fry.
Wow.
I like the Mongo girl, but she always makes a mistake and then has to go back, and I'm just like, come on.
Yeah, I mean,
She always does
showmanship
that.
and like programming are not really like simpatico necessarily. The two things you don't really find programmers that are also like, you know, theater majors. That often. Although I guess it does happen.
Let me check if Wes Boss has a quick video.
Yeah.
I think you guys would really.
Yeah,
like
let's
it.
see. Wes Boss.
Oh, one S.
Okay. Is it gonna be hard for me to follow this though? Is it gonna be just so awesome?
Oh, Jonathan, you're awesome.
Okay, Wes Boss. He's Canadian
You
though,
have
so
to
I
think
guess.
about it.
Learn, Redux. Okay, here's 2:14 React for beginners. Let's
Should we do
do that.
React.js for beginners?
He is a lot blonder than me.
This is an ad for a project management tool called Monday.com. This is what it looks like, and this is what it feels like. Hey, thanks so much for checking out React for Beginners. My name is Wes Boss. This course is for anyone who wants to learn how to build React.js applications from scratch, as well as anyone who wants to level up on their JavaScript skills. If you've got any questions as to what this course is going to cover, make sure you check out reactforbeginners.com, and they've got a full listing of all the topics and videos that we're going to cover. What I wanted to do here is show you what we're going to be building from scratch and detail all of the different parts of it. So we have this app called Catch of the Day, and what that is it allows us to manage the inventory in the order of a seafood market. And the problem with the seafood market is that the price and the quantity and the availability of everything can change at any given moment. And as people are shopping, that data should be immediately updated. We shouldn't have to wait for a page reload. So what I have here is I've got one of the store's inventory open right here, and I've got a listing on the left-hand side here of all of the different fishes that we can have. And you can go ahead and add one of these fishes to your order. And when you go ahead and add a secondary, you see the little cha-ching pop up there. You can go ahead and add a third one. You can go on the side here and change Pacific Halibut to Atlantic. And it'll change it right here as well as up here. And what's happening right here is that every time I'm editing my content, it's going to be updating on my Firebase as well as syncing with our React state and updating. Same goes for price. If I go ahead and change the price on this, we're going to see it updating right here and where we display the price, the amount that we have in our cart, as well as our order total. We can go ahead and change the description, as well as if I go to maybe like King Crab, right here, I can change it from fresh to sold out. And as soon as that's sold out, it will display a message to the user that, sorry, you can't get that one any longer. So what we've got going behind the hood here is that we've got a React state, we've got props passing data, we've got a whole bunch of different components that are sort of working together. We've got React animations, and we've got Firebase as a database on the back end. So that's what we're going to be building in this application, and we'll cover sort of the really good fundamentals up to building a bit of a more advanced React application. If you've got any questions, please let me know and check out reactforbeginners.com.
Okay, yes. Good. 15-ish minutes. Yeah, that was definitely a lot better than a lot of these guys. Okay, so let's look at what we have in store for us for this next week.
Hey guys, it's Chris with Dev Coffee, and this is React.
Yeah, just depending what everybody wants. I mean, if they want to stay here and learn stuff. Okay. Yeah, what do you guys think? Do you want to break early today and take this opportunity for self-study and homework? Or another thing we could do is do like office hours for the last hour or something where we just help you guys with homework. If you want to do that.
I would vote for that.
Okay. Okay, so we will just take a look at what we're going to be doing in the next week then, and then we'll go into office hours. So, full stack lesson plans, part 2. So here's what we will be covering in week 19. This week we'll be learning React declarative. So this is a good vocab word for all of you, declarative. Does anybody know what this word means within the context of web applications? Declarative? No, that's not really.
Actually want to have things based on the DOM.
Yeah, so what it means is that you're programming things by declaring them to be so. So you're saying, hey, I want a component here. So I want a component here. As opposed to saying, hey, I want a component here, so here's a div and another div inside it and another div inside that and blah, blah, blah. So you're saying exactly what you want to do explicitly every time. Instead, you're just declaring, hey, I want a component, and you're basically defining your own domain-specific language for what these things are going to entail. So that way, at the high level, you're saying, hey, I'm going to have a button component here. I'm going to have a input component here. So you basically just go through and in more of a plain English high-level way declare the way your application is going to work instead of getting into the nitty-gritty details with each thing. Does that make sense to everyone, what the word declarative means in this context? I could look up a definition for you.
Similar to how in the video we were watching earlier, you kind of defined what the action button would end up being.
Yeah, exactly. Your style of programming is declaring things. So you have a domain-specific language. You have the language that refers specifically to the domain of what you're doing. Say it's a form you're filling out for health insurance, right? So then we have our domain-specific language specifically for that, for what all the components are for signing up for health insurance, how they work, all that stuff. And then you can just declare, hey, I want a social security number field here, instead of having to go through and explicitly say, okay, it's going to be, whatever it is, 9 numbers, and it's going to be, numbers 1 through 9. All that stuff will already be predefined somewhere, and you just declare it, and then it will go back and reference all the predefined things that you have somewhere else.
Basically, you have like pre-built components and some predetermined syntax.
Right, you're declaring it. Yeah, so it's a way to get to more of a higher level. You're defining all the nitty-gritty and the weed stuff somewhere lower down, and then you're just basically referencing it from up here, high level. So that way you can have a high-level thing that says how your whole application works, instead of having it be a bunch of lower-level things pieced together.
Similar to how we started using callback functions in that matter, we created the function, and then whenever we needed it, we just called it another one.
Yes, it is similar to that. That is a good reference, a good analogy. Okay, let me read you guys this definition. In computer science, declarative programming is a programming paradigm. We learned what a paradigm is, right? All of you guys remember that? A style of building the structure and elements of computer programs that express the logic of a computation without describing its control flow. Expresses the logic of a computation without describing its control flow. The control flow is basically like the nitty-gritty details. The logic is the higher level stuff. Many languages that apply this style attempt to minimize or eliminate side effects by describing what the program must accomplish in terms of the problem domain. So as I said, it's domain specific. You guys can look this up and read about it, but I just wanted you guys to have a working kind of definition of what this word declarative means.
Those pre-built components, as Mario was referencing, those are ones we built previously or ones that exist within the actual native.
Wait, you mean Nelson? The thing Nelson was saying? Mario?
Well,
What are
pre-built components, I mean, there are some components, like if you use a component library.
Yeah, so there are component libraries for React. So for example, like forms. A lot of the stuff with forms, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The submit button is going to be a submit button pretty much anywhere you use it. You might want to have the corners rounded a little differently. You might want to do a different color, but it's basically the same thing. So you could have a form library that just gives you all the inputs as components. And then you would just reference them that way. Instead of having to build out components for each type of input and stuff, you could just reference somebody else's nice library. So yeah, make sense?
Can you apply your custom CSS route to those?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, CSS works independently of JavaScript, including React and anything that happens there. So if something has a CSS class, if there's a style sheet included on that page, the style sheet will get, or the style rule will get applied to that class. The browser just does that automatically. It's what it does. So you can use CSS with React, or you can use CSS like on top of React. You can do it either way. You can make your CSS work with React, or you can just go and add in some style rules on top of React. You say, hey, there's this React button, and I just want to make it red. You can go figure out what class it has, and then just add a little style rule to your style sheet to make it red. Well, and we'll see how it's all working together. You'll get plenty of examples. Okay, so let's look at what we'll be doing this week. We will introduce students to React, a declarative, efficient, and flexible JavaScript. So why was it efficient? Because you don't have to refresh the page, because we're using the what? We're reconciling, we're using the virtual DOM. This eliminates the bottleneck of the JavaScript engine talking to the layout engine. Okay. So, and it's flexible, and there's a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. Before that, however, we're going to need a primer on ES6. So let's talk a little bit about ES6 today. So we'll go over key features of the framework, JSX. What is JSX, everyone? It's the way, it's a templating framework. It's a templating language. Simply put, yeah.
JavaScript or HTML.
Yeah, it's a templating language. What other templating language have we used in this class? Handlebars. So it's similar to Handlebars. It lets you do some other stuff that Handlebars doesn't do. Specifically, you can declare methods like we saw with the counter thing. Also, it keeps track of state and properties, which other templating frameworks don't do. The other important thing that it does is it includes components within components, right? As we saw with that submit button example. Right? You guys with me so far? And we had the tag. So when we want to include a component in another component, do you guys remember how we did that? We have a special tag with that component's name. Like if we have a submit button component, then we just put a submit button tag and it knows to include the submit button component. Okay, so JSX components, we talked about states, we talked about property, life cycle, we will talk about a little bit later. This is just sort of the life cycle that a component goes through until it's done. Like you might have, I don't know, a volume component that shows up when you click the volume button, you set the volume to what you want it to be, and then it disappears and it goes away.
Well, it's also mounting lifecycle too, how that data is going to mount onto your virtual DOM.
Right, that too. We're mounting data onto our virtual DOM. We're pulling it in, so we'll get to learn about all of that. So, Jackie, you might even know more about it than I do. Okay, so by the end of this unit, you students should be able to understand how React lets web devs build quicker and less resource-hungry sites. I don't think that's correct English, but anyway. By the end of this unit, students should understand how React lets web devs build quicker and less resource-hungry sites quicker than mere HTML and jQuery. So it does that, and we've talked about that. There are pros and cons to either one. Sometimes it'll make sense to use plain HTML and jQuery. Now, just because we're learning React, this does not mean that you should never use plain HTML and jQuery again. There are cases where both are good, and it's going to be up to you guys as developers to figure out what makes sense for you. Okay, makes sense? All right. Any questions on that? Any more questions on when to use jQuery, when to use React? Okay. So we're going to have slideshows, we're going to have homework, we're going to be doing a bunch of stuff with ES6. We're going to be learning about Babel, Gretel, you'll be happy to know. Object deconstructing, constructors to classes, then we'll have this exercise, Hello React with Bootstrap, JSX variables, calculator, we're going to make a calculator. Not again. We're gonna have a component map, a decrement counter, kind of like what we saw in that example from Facebook. Friend refactor. Did we have a friends app or something that we made previously?
Yeah, we made the friend.
Oh, the friend finder. So we're gonna get to redo this in React now.
We're gonna end up implementing React as one of our previous assignments? Or a class example?
No, this is just gonna be an example of how we would redo a previous example in React.
Because a lot of our homework assignments,
Yeah, and it is actually helpful to redo things in React that you have previously done in jQuery because you start to understand the new ways of doing things, whereas you already understand the old way. That's like an extra thing that you're going to have there that's helping you out, an extra frame of reference.
You're probably gonna have.
What's that? Another way to skin it. Yes.
So we're starting with
We're
day
gonna end
one,
up reading its article.
exercises on Tuesday.
On Tuesday, yeah. So that's the first week. So we have this extra week. I guess they planned it in when they scheduled the course. I asked Siobhan, like, are we going to be missing a week now that we did it this way? She said, no, it's all accounted for.
So then the
So we're
React
good.
homework will be due next Saturday.
We'll be doing next Saturday. This, the scraper, Mongo scraper is due today.
But if
at
we're
midnight.
gonna be going back to Tuesday, Saturday, why would it be Saturday?
I don't know. I didn't make that decision. I don't really care.
I think that's how it like originally was, and then we had one of the mistakes, and then it was pushed to Tuesday.
It depends. There are different ways of
Yeah.
doing it. In other schools, they have it always due on Tuesday, so that way everyone can always be
Yeah.
current and focusing on the thing that we're learning that week, which seems like the right way to do it.
Like heaviest part of the lesson.
Yeah, I mean, like, we can.
Yeah,
push it back to
Siobhan
Tuesday.
makes like tweaks to it based on how all the students are doing. She tries to adjust stuff like as best she can to keep everyone in line, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Basically, the important thing is that you guys get homework done and you don't fall too like hopelessly behind. That's all I really care about, and that you're able to focus on what we're doing in class. I mean, that's really what's important. You guys know by now we'll always pretty much give you guys extensions when you ask for them. I don't think, has anyone ever not gotten an extension, or has Siobhan told you no, you can't have an
I
extension?
know, I talked to Siobhan about this, Siobhan was like, I don't really care, and
Yeah.
I was like, okay.
We just want you guys to get through the program and, get your value out of it. That's the important thing. I don't want to be like the homework police. So what else do we get to learn today? Do we want to talk about ES6, some ES6 features? Did you want to train the trainer, Jackie, on some ES6? Yeah, can you get up here and do some live coding on the console?
Yay,
Awesome.
Jackie!
Yeah, so.
I'm a girl, sorry, I can't.
Okay, I'm just gonna get this ready for you. Oh, you need your girl? Okay, that means we're not gonna be able to record it though.
Okay,
Yeah,
you know
remember
what,
Dan's
you want, I
watching the
can,
live stream.
do pair coding, pair programming, whatever you called it.
Okay, so I'll be the driver? Okay.
Okay,
Or
Wanna be
no,
the
somebody
driver?
else be the driver. I'm the teacher.
oh, who's gonna drive? Thanks, Sammy.
Woo! Teamwork!
Are you having someone else drive? Do you have like a Windows translation?
I mean, it's
Yeah, that's a
JavaScript.
really good way to look at it. You need a Windows translator.
Windows transpiler.
Transpiler.
You're recording on this or on this?
No, not the laptop, the desktop.
So
Yeah,
do we have
Is laptop down?
No.
do we have Get Bash and all that stuff on here?
What?
No, I think
No,
he
it's
just
just from
wants you to
the.
write on the console.
No,
Yeah,
she's gonna
it's
tell
just
you
for the
something. So we're gonna talk about what are some features of ES6, and she's gonna show you how they work.
Like,
You
on-
could
on
pretty
that
much do this
console.
on your own, too, Jackie. But so let's start with arrow functions first.
Well, let me just do
That'd
just a
be
quick overview.
I don't
For
know.
eight-
No, on the console.
On the
That
console.
one,
See how I have it
we already
open?
have
Just
open.
right there, right where you are.
We're gonna
Oh,
record
this.
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
ES6, Xmas script is a result of Microsoft and Netscape trying to come together for standard for their scripting languages. Microsoft was using JScript and Netscape was using JavaScript. So then this became a standard for using JavaScript.
Yeah, so can I add some background meta information there?
Isn't this
So-
like 20 years ago? Netscape?
This is 20 years ago with Netscape. We talked about this in the very beginning of the class. I don't know if you guys remember this, but I told you guys how JavaScript was made by Brandon Ike in 10 days. The reason it had to be made in 10 days was so it could ship out on a floppy disk with Netscape 2. they first tried to put Java into the browser. This failed terribly. Java is way too heavy to work in a web browser. So they had this computer software developer there, Brandon Ike, who liked Lisp, which was a dialect of Scheme. And he thought Lisp could be the language of the browser. It's lightweight, it's functional, it does everything that a browser language would do. And it turned out he was really right about this. But people basically hated on it because it was Lisp. It has a ton of parentheses. A lot of developers really didn't like the style of the programming language. So they said, hey, if this is going to work, we're going to have to make it look more like Java and the types of programming languages people are used to. So replace some of the parentheses with curly brackets, make it look more like Java. The dates we're going to make look like the Java dates because Netscape back then had a partnership with Sun Systems that made Java. So they had basically agreed that Java would be the language of the browser because it would be advantageous to their business goals. But it didn't work. The technology just didn't work. So they found something else that sort of looked like Java that would basically do the same thing for them business-wise, but that would also work as a programming language. So that's how we got JavaScript. He made the whole thing in 10 days, which is crazy because you guys think about your projects that you did in 10 days, right? And we barely, can you imagine making the whole language of JavaScript in 10 days? It's like unfathomable. So he did that. Then Microsoft, that was at the height of the browser wars, so Microsoft realized they needed it too. So they took the whole thing, reverse engineered it, made it their own thing called JScript, which worked almost as well, but not quite. And there are all these weird things that broke. So they got rid of that pretty quickly. Then Netscape decided they wanted to make this a standard, right? So it would be sort of cemented in so everyone would have to use it. So they took it to the European Computer Manufacturers Association, where we get the name ECMA. The reason they took it to the European Computer Manufacturers Association was because they had a deal with the European Computer Manufacturers Association, so they knew they would push the standard through really, really quickly. Whereas if they took it to the ISO or to the W3C even, they would make it go through a more rigorous standards process where Microsoft would have had more input, other technology companies had more input, and it would have gotten basically messed up. Slower with the European Computer Manufacturers Association, Netscape basically got to do what they wanted without too much pushback. So that's why it's called ECMA.
So Bill Gates is the easiest way to enter.
Yeah, but it was sort of to spite Bill Gates, but it was his style of approach. I mean, they were all taking a very aggressive business.
Are you uncommenting things that shouldn't be uncommented?
These are just my notes.
Okay.
Okay, so let's start with arrow functions. Jackie, show us
Oh,
an
we're into
example of
arrow
an arrow
functions,
function.
arrow functions, arrow functions. Default parameters, or spread operator, templates returning object literal, string methods.
You should know how to do this by now.
Yeah, but I just want to give them the right. And I don't think I did, but Sammy, take it away. So, but I know there was something lexical about it.
Yeah, so there,
we
we can, I mean, I know that I can help you out.
Great.
Sam can help you out,
Thanks.
Sam can help you out.
So in the traditional way of writing a function, you would do function, pass in your parameter, parameter argument.
Well, you have to put the word function too.
Yeah.
Oh, with an arrow function, yeah. I thought we were showing a regular old function.
Yeah.
Oh, is that what we're doing?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll do this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Here, I'm gonna refresh the page and see if that shouldn't help.
Maybe it has something to do with the Zoom.
Control 0.
Whoa.
There we go. Can everyone see that?
Yes, plus, control plus.
Yeah.
You should be able to make it bigger without cutting off the line.
No, yeah,
Oh,
go
that,
minus.
Is that one okay?
Yeah.
Can everyone see that?
Or you could just open the console like in a separate window.
I don't think, I mean, usually it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, you can. You don't have to dock it to the browser.
Yeah, you don't have to. Yeah, that's that, if you click the
Nope,
three
the
dots
three.
on the right.
What?
The three dots.
Next to the X. No.
And then that
No.
thing there.
Yeah,
That
the left one.
left one, dots.
That one.
Yeah.
There. And then increase that, just press the, okay.
Let's see one worse.
Yeah.
Zoom out. Do
That's
this.
refresh it.
Here.
Wait, maybe bump the text up and then refresh it.
Where's the? And then.
Oh, that's not gonna be nice.
Yeah,
Because then
that's
it'll
gonna
cut
not
stuff
work
out.
well.
That's
Yeah.
just a
Try just bump the text up, Sam, and then refresh the page. See if that-
Okay.
Then what is it?
Yeah,
F11.
she said,
No,
control.
controller.
Okay, now typing a bunch of stuff. No, okay, I guess it takes us.
Hold on.
I used to block it then.
Yeah, it doesn't have anything.
Yeah,
Really?
try that. You're gonna do that.
Yeah, okay, maybe you plug in Jackie's laptop and then the people, is Sam, with
Dan.
us? Or, Dan. Sorry.
Yeah, he said he was going to.
Oh, why don't we do like JS Fiddle or the other one?
Yeah, do JS Fiddle, that's a good one, or, CodePen.
CodePen, yeah, I was gonna say
CodePen.
CodePen is good.
Yeah, or
We
we
could
could just look up ES6 examples on CodePen. Why don't you do that?
Yeah.
Google for CodePen ES6 examples. and then we can
Well,
just
let's see it
play
live coded.
Yeah.
Wasn't that a
Go
big
for
thing?
it.
We can do a little
We
look
could
up
still live code on code.
on CodePen. Yeah, but look up ES6 examples and then it should give us some good spoilers. Okay, I think you might need an account though. It might
I
take-
have, you wanna do mine to log in?
Go for it.
No judgment on my projects on here, I'm just playing around. You senior developers, you.
You have projects, that's enough to not get us out.
Yeah.
Well, I don't
seriously.
want, I'm not as good as some of you guys.
Oh
You guys
wait,
are a
I
little
did
bit-
have a code pen.
Says the girl is basically explaining React a lot.
Yeah, that's the person that's been teaching.
Not like it ain't
I don't want to send it, cause I didn't know after that.
Wait, you made that, Jackie?
No, I'm just
Oh,
playing
okay.
with stuff, so we're gonna create new project.
Oh,
Oh.
Can we do a new pen?
Here. I got it.
Okay.
I got it.
Just do a new pen.
Well, that blows. You might be.
Yeah, they need to be cheaper and like easier.
What do I do now?
No friends, but I guess.
Yeah, can we just do a new pen? Does it have to be an entire project?
New file, is that what I want to do?
You
Go
don't
do
have
it.
to
Go back
set
and
up
do a new pen. Go back.
Yeah.
Do some new pen.
Or we could just use JS Fiddle.
Yeah.
There you go.
Bam.
All right.
Just you want to do like a just basic.
Arrow function. I don't think we need the HTML or CSS.
That's CSS.
And see if you can bump up the text size.
Yeah, you can hide the
Yeah, you
HTML
can
and
hide it.
CSS.
You can just open that in its own window.
Minimize
Minimize.
the last option.
I think if you just double click on JavaScript, you don't think.
No.
No, okay, just minimize. Okay. Okay, arrow function. Let's do a regular function bar my phone.
And by the way, these are also called fat functions, or fat arrows,
Fat arrow
which
functions.
was kind of weird.
Fat
I know
arrow function.
Yeah,
fat arrow functions, which I thought was a little politically incorrect.
Big boned.
Because the regular arrow is
Um,
attached.
Oh, right. I've always just heard them called arrow. Everyone see how that works? Now let's see the other way of writing a plain function. No, the other way of writing a plain function.
Oh, okay.
So you have these two different styles of writing functions. They have been with us since the very beginning of JavaScript. Almost every other programming language only has one way of writing a function. The reason JavaScript has two is because it has an identity crisis, where it doesn't know if it's a object-oriented language like Java or a more functional language like this.
Alright.
So everyone good with this? We understand there's two ways to write a function. They all do pretty much the same thing. It's mostly a matter of personal style, which one you use. Neither one of them is right or wrong.
But one of these is a function expression, one of these is a function declaration.
Correct. The
Okay.
declaration is the one on the bottom, but they were pretty much the same.
Oh, actually, so I'm gonna do the first way of doing an arrow
So
function.
Jonathan's gonna do the head of my.
Turn param one. plus param.
You don't need to write that, right?
Two, and you don't need to, so I'll show the other way of doing it.
I think if you have
If you're
the
returning-
brackets, you do need it.
Bar
Or maybe if only
arrow
if you have only one line, it's implicit. But if you have
two
more than one line,
equals one, comma, two.
param one, param one. And then let's do one with one param, so you can show that you don't need the parentheses.
Yeah, you don't need to.
So we've seen these in here before, right? This isn't new to any of you guys, is it? Arrow functions, do they work? Okay, good. So
To be
this
honest,
is,
I don't use them, but I know, I'm aware.
yeah, so I would suggest that you guys start using them for your node code at least. They do work in Chrome too, so front end if you want to. And you'll definitely start using them. So what are some other fun features of ES6?
Talk about constants.
Yeah, let's talk about constants. What are constants, everyone?
Variables that don't change.
Variables that don't change. So why is it advantageous to declare something as a constant instead of a scale?
Less memory.
Less memory, right? Because you know you have it set in the interpreter as something that won't change. It will allocate less memory. So you save memory. Good. What is another new type
Question
of?
on that. When we use const to declare the requirements, the dependencies
Yeah.
for our modules,
Yeah.
those doesn't change?
No, it doesn't change, because when you think about it, you're just pulling in the code from whatever library you're using. That isn't going to change. That stays the same through the whole thing. So that's why you use the constant.
The constants are changing the operation that you're doing.
So-
I mean, the value changes in the library when you do it.
Right.
Yeah, because for example, when we're using Express, we're working with Express and then doing things. But those lines of code doesn't change. That's what.
So the good way to think about it, it's immutable. It's an immutable variable, or it's a read-only. It's a good way to look at it too.
Right, it's read-only. So if you have to instantiate one of your libraries, you do that with a var. So like, for instance, when we require Express, you can save that to a const. And then when you declare app, you need to declare that as a var, because that instance of Express is going to change. That's where it's going to store all of the stuff that's specific to your app. Okay.
You have a let as well.
Yeah, so let allows us to declare variable using lexical scope with the code block.
Right, well, it blocks scope. It uses block scope rather than not lexical
I
scope.
also read something that some features of the ES6 are hoist.
Or what?
Oh, the hoisting,
The
the
hoisting,
JavaScript hoisting.
Like
Where like you
they're
can
moving on
use it
top.
before you declare it.
Oh, yeah, so they have added that too.
Does that apply to fonts?
Yeah, that will work with all of them. That will work with all of them. I wouldn't recommend doing it that way, but you can't do that. Like if you need to use something before you declare it, it will work. I guess. Does it work in all cases, or do you have to do something?
That's what I'm looking.
Yeah, so I don't know. That's a newer. We'll get into talking about that later. You guys probably won't be
I
that,
mean, it's
that
good
much.
for when you like break up functions, for example, into different sections, like you have all your getters and setters. You have like sometimes you.
Oh,
create
and
a
then
function up
sometimes
here
you
and then-
need one thing from a setter
Exactly.
function that's below it or something. Okay, so that's useful. So let's talk a little bit though about let and block scope, because that's a little bit more important. So let is quickly becoming the new var. I was talking to Jonathan about this, and I was like, no, I'm just gonna keep using var because I'm used to using var. But really, the thing is, most languages have what are called block scope, which means that you have access to something when it's in the lexical scope of the current enclosing block, meaning the current function. JavaScript has something else called function scope, which it gets from Scheme, because when JavaScript was made by Brandon Ike, he wanted everything to be kind of like Scheme. But function scope is one thing that doesn't really seem to work outside of this. So function scope, what it means is that if you have a variable and you declare it inside of an if statement, so you have an if and then an else, right? And you declare your one variable inside the if statement. It will be available inside that if statement. It'll be available inside the else block in anywhere within the enclosing function, because only an enclosing function cuts off the scope. This is different than pretty much any other language. Pretty much any other language, if you declare a variable inside the if block, it will only be accessible inside the if block. It won't be accessible to the else, and it won't be accessible to the closing function. So pretty much every language besides Lisp or Scheme or JavaScript does it this way. This is a common job interview question that I was telling you guys to be careful for. So they may ask you what happens in JavaScript if I declare a variable inside the if statement. Can I get to it from the else? Can I get to it inside closing block? And you can tell them, yes, JavaScript has function and scope. So it will only the enclosing function is what defines the scope for something. So let allows you to use block scope, which is more like these other languages where it's scoped to every block, including the if statements and the else statements and stuff like that. That's just fun. Does that make sense to everyone? So that's
Go inside. Like
what?
if you declare a let or whatever in the enclosing function, do you still have access to it from the if and else statements?
Yeah, if you have, yeah, it gets everything that's inside. But if you declare a let inside the if statement, then you won't have access to it from the else. So in fact, let's try that. If we could, Sam, let's try to make a if statement. Let's try to make an enclosing function first, and then let's put an if statement, and let's try it with a let and a var. Okay?
Is this kind of?
Yeah, that's fine. So let's put, right, yeah, so, okay. Yeah, or we'll just put like if true.
It has to, okay.
Okay. There you go.
Okay, so let's do this. Let's put if true under the ABC, bar 2 ABC, put a return at the end of that line. No, next line. Okay, put the if statement and then just put if true. Let if true, no, var. var 3.
Oh.
Yeah, try it. Var space var 3 equals foo. Okay. And then on the bottom, outside of the if statement.
Oh.
Okay, yeah, do that. Do let var 4 equal something else.
We thought you were gonna write something.
It's FOO, by the way.
Oh.
Yeah, just, yeah.
Wait,
Okay.
doesn't foo stand for effed up beyond all repair?
Yes, but for some reason
Yeah.
programmers changed it to
Yeah.
FOO.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know why. It's a really old programming convention that goes back. Okay, so let's come outside of that if block. So come down there, put a new line. Now console log var 3 and console log var 4, and we'll see what happens. My theory is that we will be able to log var 3, but var 4 will cause a problem for us. It's going to need to find or something. Yeah, you can. Let's do it this way. Okay, so let's try it.
It's already been running.
Clear, hit clear, and then run again. There should be a run button.
Yeah, it's automatic.
Well, how do you run it again?
It's supposed to do it.
I think the button is just cut off. Try scrolling to the right.
Right here.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah. There should be a run button. Usually there is.
Change something.
Yeah, hit enter after that, there's last semicolon.
Yeah, just.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, just hit enter.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, see, it only gets the foo, it doesn't get the var, because let is block scope, so it only exists within the scope of the if statement. The var exists within the scope of the function. You guys all see how that works? So now you know the difference.
Oh, okay. So
In
let
terms
is.
of your programming, very little difference to how it will actually do that.
We'll scope
But that
some
says
numbers
like
right.
inside the
Okay.
box, so
Yeah, so it'll attach, so the nearest bracket for var is the if statement, so that's literally contain it within.
Okay, so var is the one that's like all over the place and
var
uses
is
a whole.
function.
What?
Var is function scope. So
Oh,
that foo
yeah,
is going to
you have
attach it to
var
the function,
two,
which
which
is
is
my
then var
function.
four equals.
Okay.
So foo variable 3 only lives within my function.
Okay, let's talk more about
You get
scope and
But
arrow
it
function.
got printed outside. Oh, it
Exactly.
only lives within
It's
function,
a function.
and var 4 with the let only lives within the if statement.
Exactly.
So we
This is
want to use let because it's less wasteful of resources. It throws stuff away as soon as it's not needed.
It is the main advantage to using let is it's more similar to other languages. So there are certain algorithms, certain ways of doing things that have been established in other languages, and then people get annoyed because they try to do them in Java and they say, oh yeah, there's this weird function scope thing and it's throwing things off just a little bit. It basically works the way it should, but then there's just like a few little edge cases that it does weird, so this eliminates a few little edge cases for weird stuff.
So in other words, just use let all the time.
There are different opinions on that, and it's not gonna make or break you. Either way, it's good to just understand what it does, but in terms of like writing your apps, there's not gonna really be much difference. Okay, so let's talk about arrow functions again. Does anybody know the difference in the scope of an arrow function versus the scope of a regular function? Do you guys remember how sometimes you can't get the scope inside a callback function or something? So sometimes you'll have like a variable that's attached to the context and you won't be able to get it in the callback function. Like say we're looping over an array of objects with a for each, so that's one function. And you could do this. Can I drive for a second and then I can just show down here? Thank you, Jackie. Let's give them a Okay, you have more? Okay, so wait, I want to drive though, so because there's certain things I want. Okay.
Well, here, let me get out of here so I can see.
I think I also know that the arrow function copy the scope of the parent.
Yeah, they copy the scope of the parent. So I'll show you guys this. So let's say we have a nice array. You can come back up, Jackie. You're not done yet. I just wanted to show them this one thing. So we have a nice array of 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to, if I want to iterate over it, I do what, right? I do for each. So this is going to do one set of instructions on each element in the array. So I would do this the traditional way by passing in a function. And then,
Function would take.
yeah, and then I
item,
could console log this.
But it needs to take an item as a parameter.
It could, or I could just use this. The scope of this function will refer to the item anyway. So usually we do it as an argument, but just to illustrate this point, I'm going to do it this way instead.
Okay.
So wait, let me get rid of these other console. Okay. Now. Why is this not working?
71.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do this in the regular JavaScript console. I think.
Nice.
Whoa.
Whoa. Okay.
So each of these refers
This is referring to the window.
This is referring to the window. Yeah, so this is referring to the window. If I use jQuery each, it'll do it. Let me see if it has jQuery. So, hold on.
Yeah, well, sometimes that
Hold on
happens
here.
though when you.
Hold on, we gotta get to a use case where I can show you guys how this. So if I go to like jQuery, then I can use jQuery in the console. So here I can do the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4 dot each.
Or iterating over a set of jQuery selectors.
Yeah,
or objects.
correct. Okay, yeah, you're right. So I can do this instead. $dot each. And then I pass, this takes two arguments. One is my array, and then my callback function.
Wait.
Okay, gotcha. Function, alright, and then here I can console.log this, and this should work.
I love you.
I know how to spell log. Okay, so now it's going to iterate over it, and it's going to give me all four numbers, right? This is a number, it's showing me the prototype of the number. So then, let's see, what happens then if I have another function inside of here. Let's say now, in addition to doing this, I also want to, well, let's get another example. Let's say I have an array of arrays, right? So this is going to be an array of 1, 2, 3. This is going to be an array of 1, 2. And then this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, or just 3 and 4. And then I'm going to close this here. So now I have an array of arrays. Okay, so now we have an array of arrays. So
And I'm
now,
after the end of closing.
oh, yeah. After the where? Oh,
Right
yeah.
there.
Okay. Now I have an array of arrays, so it's going to log each of these. So let's say I want to iterate over this array of arrays and then iterate over each array inside. You guys see what I'm saying here? So let's.
The top example, displayed in the log.
Right, so here I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do $.each, and we're just doing this so you can see the kinds of problems that you can run into with scope and why arrow functions are good. So then I'm going to do each. This is the first one. That's this array that we're on, and I'm going to give it a new function here. All right, it's kind of hard with this setup because the screen is a little higher. So this is going to be a function here. Sure, it is. I'm trying to get on the screen. My excuse is perfectly good. Okay, so this. Okay, so now what should happen is it's going to on this. So now it gives us each of these numbers, right? Now let's say I want to get to something out here. What if I want to get to that parent array? This. You can't, right? I can't do that. Here, I can do that. I can, if I change this to an arrow function, then I can just call this item. And then I can log item and this will point back to this array of items. See how that works? So it's the number 3 that we're on now, and then it's the 1, 2, 3. Then it's the number 3 that we're on now, then it's the 1, 2, 3. You guys see how this works? So this is one way that arrow functions could be helpful. Before we had this, what a lot of programmers would do is they would save this as like self. So especially programmers who are familiar with Java, in Java there's something called self that refers back to the context of the object versus the context of the function. So a lot of people felt like JavaScript was just broken, and they just make a var self equals this, and then down here in your nested function you could use self the way you would use this. But this is a really bad way to do it. It wastes a lot of memory, so that's why the arrow functions are. Does that make sense to everyone? Everyone follow that? Okay, good. All right, Jackie, what else do we have?
Let's talk about the spread operator since you're.
Let's
we're
talk
talking
about the spread
arrays.
operator. Okay, come on back up here.
So should we do? I'm gonna call this is a really neat feature because it allows you to combine arrays and put them in with each other. Ready, Jonathan?
Yeah.
So it takes an array and it spreads it into individual elements. It has its individual components. So if
Does
you
that
wanna
make
do-
sense to you guys? We're gonna see an
So
example.
do var
Okay.
num1
One.
equals an array of 1, 2, 3. And then close that. And then do var 2. I'm sorry, var
No.
number 2 equals 4, 5, 6.
So is this deconstructing assignment? What is this feature called again?
This is called the spread operator.
Okay, so it's different than deconstructed assignment. Okay, so
Um,
spread operator. So now we have two arrays. One is num1 and num2. So how does this work?
so console log, if you would please, number 2.
Num2. Okay. That'd be fine. No. Okay. No. It's this is 4,
Yeah.
5, 6.
So in that nums2, so it returns an object, right?
It returns an array.
An array, excuse me. So if you put 3 dots, do
Right. So here's what we do
var.
instead. So we can do this dot dot dot.
Well, actually, if you just do dot dot dot, and then console log var,
Okay. Enter. Wait. No. That's
Wait.
not right.
do console log var.
What do you want me to do? Show me the.
Here's my example. So if you add, this is probably easier.
Oh,
Two variable.
okay. So you
Yeah.
do dot dot dot
Yeah.
times 1. So this is what this dot
Yeah.
dot dot assignment does. It
Yeah.
deconstructs it into its next array. I think. Dot dot dot.
Or why don't you do var meats equals ham salami bacon, and then console log meats with the spread operator, and then it should come up.
Oh,
See
you
this
know
example
what?
right here?
It does. I don't think the spread operator works in this version of Chrome. That could be. So let's try this. So we already have num2. That's the same thing. Num1 is just an array. And then if I console dot log, we're not going to need this for React anyway. So dot
But
dot
it's a nice
dot.
feature to have.
It is a very nice feature. 4, 5, 6. So this deconstructs the array and makes them all separate variables, which is useful.
Just do backticks and
There's
like that
a
too.
website called es6console.com, so lets you run ES6.
Yeah, there's a few different ones of those that will do that. Okay, so backticks. These are backticks, otherwise known as ticks.
Literal.
It turns a string into a literal, so we
Yeah.
can put in return. We can put in returns where normally we couldn't. Have you guys run into this problem where you need to have stuff on new lines with JavaScript strings and you couldn't do it? Or what happens if you need to put like a bunch of quotes and plus signs and stuff like that? This will cause all kinds of problems with you. Normally,
Yeah.
if you use string literals, you won't have to do this.
Maybe if you use the actual word, it'd be easier to.
Object literal, but we should do that if we had like, kind of like, I mean, string methods are good,
Well, template literals as well.
template literals, and then, and then you can put, if you have a variable you want to
You put
define,
variables in the
you can
strings.
put the $sign, what Mario was doing the other day, $sign in the brackets, and you can define.
Yeah, so let's see. You have the example of that. That's just called string
Typing
interpolation.
something and then put one of the num1 or num2.
I use
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
the literals.
Yeah.
Like when we're doing MySQL, like to run multi-line
Or
queries.
SQL query, yeah, SQL queries is a great example of where you use. Okay, I'm just gonna go look this up. So this is what's called string interpolation, otherwise known as templating, which is the same thing you guys would have used handlebars for. ES6 string. Go ahead, John.
So like I did a function and that has the parameters name and age, and then console log, my name is.
So this is a good site. I did this when I did my presentation on ES6 at South Florida Code Camp. This site gives you pretty much all of the different stuff you can do with ES6. It is es6-features.org. So this is string interpolation, as I said. So you basically have a customer, their name is Fu. You have a card, the amount, the product is 7, and so we can just write this nice little message that says, hello, customer name. Want to buy a something card for this amount, and then it goes ahead and just puts all this stuff in for us.
Helps, when you're concatenating.
Whereas in ES script 5 or 4, we would have to do all this crazy stuff with plus signs and \n for new lines and so on and so forth. You guys see how that works?
And that's different from
handlebars?
Just kidding.
Okay, so then you have extended literals where we can do stuff like this for binary representations of data. You guys probably won't use too much since we have assembly code and binary representations and stuff.
The function generator is really awesome.
Do that. Also, we have Unicode string matching, which didn't used to work before. So now we can compare strings in different Unicode formats like Chinese. What was the thing you said?
The function generator.
Oh, generators. Yeah, so we won't get into using generators. Generators are a bit more complicated. Would you like to try to explain generators?
I mean, you can play and pause basically a function, and
Right.
you can decide when you want to call it or fire it.
Right, so you have a function, it'll go through, then it'll call next, which is another function that you pass in to go do this thing, then you can call it back and it'll go do more stuff, then it will go and do the next thing. So I'm still kind of confused by this, to be honest. I have not ever really used it in my code, although I have looked at code that uses it. So this is an example for how you can write an efficient algorithm for generating the Fibonacci sequence. Based on doing that, so basically you have your symbol iterator, then you're yielding the cursor. So if any of you remember from math class, the way that Fibonacci works is that you have you have a sequence that starts with one number, like say it starts with 0, then it goes to 1, and the next number in the sequence is the last 2 added together. So 0 plus 1 is 1. So the next number in the sequence is 1. Then you take the next 2 numbers in the sequence, it's 1 and 1. 1 and 1 is 2. So the next number in the sequence is 2. Then you take those 2 numbers, 2 and 1 is 3. So the next one is 3. So it's going to go through and iterate over it and keep doing this thing where it adds the last 2 numbers and then makes that the next number. And it does that here because we're able to say let n of Fibonacci, so we're looping over Fibonacci up to a certain point. Then if n is less than 1,000, because we're doing it up to 1,000 numbers in the sequence, then we're going to break.
Looks like if n is greater.
Then break. Yeah, right. So we're calculating up to 1,000 numbers in this sequence. So to be honest, I don't quite understand how all of this is working yet, but that's basically what it's doing. And then you have stuff that says next, generator function. So this is for iterators, how you would use generators. Generators do matching to. You tell it what it will yield. So if you put the star next to the function, it becomes a generator function, which means that it can be like reused. Basically, you can pause and play it in this way, and then that go do other stuff, which uses it, then it gets to the point that it needs it to be, it pauses it, then it goes and does something else, then it like plays it again. So I'll be honest, I'm not a completely 100% like familiar with how this all works yet. I haven't used it in an app yet. A lot of very good NPM packages do use this though. Do you have anything to say about generators, Jonathan? Yeah, they're kind of confusing, to be honest. I just haven't gotten around to them yet, although.
Jonathan, so since we need to learn ES6 before we progress with React, can you show us examples in which we'll be using React and ES6?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and we'll go over everything. The lesson plan isn't just going to leave you guys hopelessly like in the lurch with that stuff. We will learn ES6, and it's easy.
I know, but if we're gonna like at least go over an overview now, it should be.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Not a problem. Let's take a look at some of the exercises. 19. Okay, so here's what you guys are going to be working on today. Hello, React. Solved. So we have our hello React function. It returns that. It's using JSX. I don't know if this has.
That's right. Go back, Jonathan. See how it says import. instead of,
Right.
bar equals, that's an ES6.
Yeah,
component
so
there.
this is a
Yeah.
new thing with ES6.
Yeah.
This does the same thing as require, it just does it in a slightly different way. This came from Python, used this import and a few other languages too. The reason why you can do this is you can choose what method specifically you want to call from a library. Like say I want to use jQuery, but I don't want all of jQuery, I just want jQuery's implementation of each. So then I could say,
In that example, for example, the React with a capital R, it's getting that from.
it's getting that from React. So doing this, import React from React is the same as doing var React capital R equals require React and then dot capital R React. So it's getting the capital R React property from the library React. So you could do this by saying require var React equals require React and then capital R React equals React dot capital R React.
On the file you're importing from.
Yeah,
You
so
would
it's
still have to
getting
run
just
the-
a specific property from the library you're importing. So this is getting us just the React property from the React library. Now, all the React library has is the React property, so doing import React would do pretty much the same thing. What was your question, Sam? Yeah, everyone see how this works? So you can choose, you don't have to use the from with import. You could just do import React and it will import React with all of the properties of React. But sometimes you don't want to use everything a library has. You only want to use 2 or 3 of these things. So this import lets you specifically pick and choose what parts of the library you want to use.
If it did import without the from, then wouldn't it have to be lowercase React?
Yes, it would. And then you would do the React.React.
And React, just like the other one, is the path.
React, just like it's the path that it's
It's looking for React.js.
Yeah, it's looking for React.js in a node module. So so that part works exactly the same way. Question. Okay, so that's one nice little example of ES6 we have. Let's see what else. JSX variables. Sorry, Mario, what?
You can make things iterators that aren't.
Yeah, right. So you have like map and reduce and all of that. Those are actually ES5, not ES6. But yeah, we have those. We've gone over those before, right? You guys all understand how map, reduce, filter all work. They take functions that will let you do things to this. So for example, we talked about the example of how we would get the average of an array of numbers, right? Do you guys all remember that example of how we would do it? So what's the first thing that we need to do to get the average of an array of numbers? Because I ask people this question in job interviews all the time. That is the simple way to do it, not the best way to do it.
Okay.
With reduce, right? We do reduce, we do array.reduce. Reduce takes an argument and that is a function, right? And that function tells it how to reduce it. So we would do array.reduce and then it takes a function and it returns a plus b. It takes 2 arguments, the accumulator and then the current item, and then you return the accumulator plus the current item, and that will give you the sum of all the items in the array. And then you just divide it by the length. You guys want me to show you that code just so you can see it?
In ES6, they added a method that you can make an object, for example, iterate.
Yeah, it's apply. I think apply is what you're talking about. Yeah, there's 2 new methods, call and apply. So every function has these 2 methods, call and apply. So you can apply a function to an array, I guess. Well, how does apply work, Jonathan? It's a kind of a newer thing and that gets kind of confusing, like the generators and stuff, but it does have that ability too. And these are sort of the edge cases where people have figured out that, oh yeah, it's much quicker to do it this weird way. But it's not really at the meat and potatoes of what you guys will be. Okay, so let me show you guys real quick this example of how we would get the average, just so everyone can see this, because I use this as a job interview question. It's a pretty common job interview question. So this is how we do it. We're going to call this array var a. I'll just call it. So then to get the average of all of these numbers, I just do a.reduce. This will get us the sum. We just, as an arrow function, this takes 2 arguments. It takes the accumulator and then the current item that we're on now. arrow function, and then it's just going to return a plus b. I don't need to do return with the arrow function because it's implicit. And then, so this will get me the sum of all these numbers, and then what's the last step to find the average? Divided by the what? The by a dollar, right? And then this is it. So if anybody ever asks you this in a job interview or anything like that, this is how we do it. Okay, you guys all got that? Please make sure you're understanding what's happening. Don't want anyone to leave this class without coming out this way.
Keep that up.
Okay, I'm gonna slack it out to you guys.
Great.
Okay, so yeah, as far as the ES6 stuff that we'll be covering this week, I don't think it's gonna get anything more complicated than the arrow function. But let's take a look at some more.
What about the classes?
Classes?
Oh, JavaScript classes.
Oh, so JavaScript classes. This is another new feature of ES6. We talked about JavaScript having prototypical inheritance, right? So it uses prototypes for the way inheritance works. Other languages use class-based inheritance, which means that you can define a class. A class will have certain methods and properties. Classes can instantiate and inherit from other classes. So with ES6, they decided, okay, we'll throw in this object-oriented functionality as well, and if people want to use it, they can. Brandon Ike, the designer of JavaScript, said it made him very sad that they added this object-oriented programming functionality because he's a Lisp guy and he believes in functional. So some people use it, some people are very against it, and they don't use it. Again, programming is a very opinionated kind of thing.
That you prefer functional programming.
Yeah.
It's totally become object.
Well, it's become multi-paradigm, which means some people like functional programming and they use it as a functional language. Some people like object-oriented and they try to use it as an object. It used to be that the people who wanted to use it as an object-oriented language were kind of fighting it and just barely like finagling it to kind of do what they want. Now that they've added class and class-based inheritance, it basically does that by design. So we still have to sort of see how it plays out and which direction it will go, or if it'll just go in all directions. Yeah, everything can definitely be done without classes. Classes with JavaScript are very, very new. I would recommend not using classes and just follow what React is doing to get that high-level structure of your architecture. These are very hard decisions. It's very experienced computer scientists normally make. So I would recommend getting the benefit of the stuff that's already out there. Use libraries like React and others that give you some of this structure already. And then as you get more experience, you can start taking a look at their design decisions, how they're designing it, and why it makes sense, or why you maybe think that it doesn't make sense. And then you can start making your own decisions on how to architect this kind of stuff, whether you want to use classes or whether you want to use pseudo classes and modules.
The cases where it would be like too complicated to use one paradigm and you can implement aspects of one and two.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and people use it only all the time. Like with the NPM packages that we're pulling into our project, some of them are using classes, some of them are very object-oriented, others are very functional, some of them are generators, we're doing stuff in all kinds of things. Which in a way is kind of what makes JavaScript so powerful, because you have the ability to do things in a lot of different ways. Maybe people who are building one kind of library will like doing things in one kind of way, and then people who do another kind of thing will do things in another kind of way. So it makes things very free and allows people to do things the way they like to do them, which is good, because people have different ways of doing things, and that's good. We shouldn't be attached to one way of doing things that we say is the best. There's a case to be made for it.
So is JavaScript just gonna, off topic, is it just gonna grow in popularity?
Yeah, I think so. That definitely seems to be the trend. It is the most popular programming language now on GitHub. It is very accessible to people, which is why they like it. It's very easy. It's sort of like the common man's language. It's not too hard to learn. A lot of things are available in it. It's a very robust ecosystem. It's time tested now. So I think, yeah, it's just going to continue to grow. Like 5 years ago, people were worried that it wouldn't really be stable enough, that they wouldn't be able to use it for the big production applications and stuff, that it might not be secure, but now we've pretty much proven that it can do all of that. So I think it's going to really continue to grow.
Can Google make a replacement JavaScript called Dart?
Yeah, so Google has a language called Dart that is similar to JavaScript, but it has some better features. Microsoft also has something else called TypeScript, which is the same thing. It's like JavaScript plus kind of thing, which uses strict typing. There's another language called CoffeeScript, which is what inspired a lot of the new ES6 features, like arrow functions came from this thing called CoffeeScript. Yeah, so there are a lot of derivatives of JavaScript, a lot of things that are like JavaScript, but sort of a little different, where people think of change one thing and kind of make it better. Yeah, and Dart is definitely one of them. And it's a good thing to look into too. Dart is a good language. I recommend looking into. If you have time. So what else do we want to learn about in this class?
Lunch.
Lunch. Okay, well, I think we're going to break early. I don't see that we have much else to do. What do you guys, it's your class, though. Do you guys want to come back from lunch and do more stuff, or how do you? Okay, all right, Matthew's the leader. So,
No, I'm just saying, like, I feel as if we all have the Mongoose homework to work on.
Yeah.
okay, is everybody in agreement with it? Anybody who wants more class?
I think break and then maybe come back when anyone wants to take office hours and you guys are still available.
We could do that. You want us to stay for it? Why don't we just do office hours now then? And then break?
Yeah.
Is that good?
Yeah. I didn't hear after break. That's
Okay, yeah, go take a bathroom break. If you want to go lunch and come back, I mean, okay, guys, give yourself a round of applause. For your day today.
When we make documents, the documents get saved directly to the database, or as we go, we make it save before they.
When you
Check
so what happens is you create the database.
Oh, right, so you probably don't
Create
have
a
to do that.
Because you also has a button that we should have next to the article that says save the article.
Right.
Oh, yeah,
So do we need to put like a stamp that says save or save?
No, Maddie would just show up in the truck of the car and be like, surprise!
So you have the article.
Really, Jonathan, we brought a blank here. This won't work, right? Because you need a server for this, so he's trying to deploy it on GitHub.
But I said I have the baby now.
But it's using, Node server handlebars. Will that work with GitHub? Or can you
No.
only serve static? You can only
You
serve
can only
static.
serve static.
Yeah.
That's why we're using Heroku
Right.
for all the other stuff. So
But
you have to use
Heroku doesn't work either.
Heroku should work. Yeah, Heroku will work. Work with them together. Okay.
The example.
I'm
When
like,
you
not
know
taking the
everything
long
is in
one.
there.
Okay.
Because I'm already at home.
It says save
I've
article.
always been the mother, so it doesn't make.
So the article goes to the database when I hit save or when I load Apparently this is.
Yeah, no, I know, because this goes, it saves the stuff in the memory, add it.
No, she's not right age.
Okay, so now.
Right age.
So all this is in the memory.
Yeah, this takes it in memory, and then it can say it, and then you can say.
Oh, well, you gotta check the log.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, but I was going through this because I saw like a bunch of articles here. Then it keeps adding and adding whatever.
Yeah, I agree,
So
that's
if
kind
you
of
are
true.
passionate
And I didn't know if
Let's see
all
the,
these were in the database or not.
yeah, okay, let's see the instructions.
So you.
No, it doesn't say anything about that. It just like create the article.
So what that is that.
Yeah, I think that's it. So you say
You
the
have
whole
to
memory.
learn summary URL and add it.
Yeah, no, the way you're doing it is right. So the first time you're doing that, scrape it, keep it in memory, send it to the web.
Oh,
you know, you use
and
Windows?
I started like interviews because of informal interviews. And I know a friend who just finished getting her MBA. And that's the way she's been able to work for Amazon and Disney, because she always requested informal interviews. So it works with like, it makes you stand out. Yes, no, not, you don't want to do it for a recruiter that's, one of those recruiting tools, because then, like, they're not as attached to the company. No, because they're looking up for commission for jobs that are already out there. But if you, and HR is the one, internal HR is the one department that will make a job happen if they like you, and I've seen it happen. Like, yeah, like if you have the passion and they notice that someone else doesn't have a passion, then trust me, it's better to take your chances and not to like think about what it is. So just putting it out there.
Definitely can't hurt to put it out.
Yeah. Shit, I know I put myself out there a lot of times.
Working for a really premier prestige.
I don't know. I just
had like,
But
I
it just
saw
makes
that.
sense though. You're like the most chic one of us all.
Yeah, I just, no, I see it. I see flying to Europe and being what is it,
I was looking at,
trans.
Adobe has like a bunch of jobs in there.
But they're based in California.
No, but Adobe has a lot of offices though.
And stuff is in New York.
And then you get tickets to their.
That's the one
What
problem about
exactly
working
does
for
he deploy?
No, but then you get tickets to their conferences and they'll send you to school.
Exactly. There's, you can tell, I feel like there's job listings that like are for a company that is looking to make it into that country and for like an English headquartered in that country.
Yeah, yeah.
I've been seeing a bunch are like in Germany and like the Netherlands, and there's like some that you can tell it's like English headquarters and some that's like you need to speak German as well. Like you can tell in the way that like
I can attest to that because I used to have transcontinental conference calls with people in Europe, and they all spoke English because you have to. Like if you're working for a European company, like what you said, you have to have that. But it's easy for Europeans to have English as a second language because it's so useful. Like in the Netherlands, it's a great tech taught English. And Netherlands is a upcoming tech location as well. Wait, she goes to French school and doesn't know French?
She doesn't want to learn French. She refuses.
What?
That's just dumb. That's just silly.
Well, aren't
Or
she doesn't want to learn
Spanish?
Spanish?
She's bad.
No.
Let me tell you, if
That
anything, I
girl-
should fix my Spanish.
But look at that.
that's the way that reading novels.
Her parents are terrible at raising children.
Clearly, I only watch videos that I like. They're not, I want like, I was crazy.
No, but they're not disciplining her enough. If I had said that to my mother, she would have done her flip-flop and fucking smacked me with that shit.
It was like Blair Witch was bad. The Ritual, remember, I was like, oh my gosh,
But see, that's how cultures, like the culture dilutes throughout generations, like you don't teach your children.
Or you just want to be brain dead and you're watching this stupid movie and you're thinking, and it started off.
No, but when I say culture, I mean like language, yeah. Like you need to pass on the language because then when she has children, they're not gonna learn Spanish. They're gonna call themselves American, not Latino.
So this is how it works, right? Okay, so I can delete this one? Okay, perfect.
Do they speak
Probably in settings.
That these people say,
Oh, yeah.
That's why, oh my god.
We're going to go get Shake
Are
Shack.
we all gonna go?
Ooh, you can shake it.
Bye, kids. I like your hair. Can you eat burger fries?
Wait, what's that?
Jeez. No, you guys know.
I think is it because of the oil that they use?
Your burger fries has peanut oil.
No, honestly, I would.
You already have it on.
I was just trying to figure out how to format it.
Okay, which one is
You better understand it. All I ended up doing was HTML. As an example, okay, once I get it.
So-
This is the page one. Obviously, these weren't the simultaneous, yet, just wanted to have something to reference.
Okay.
And
so every time you push, it should deploy. Perfect for an
on
orbit.
page, this is the same one.
Is that it?
So if I go here, then it's basically on the same.
It's not gonna
Right now,
happen.
anything.
Connected. Oh, that's the deploy first.
So, no,
Okay. Fine. Following node modules.
Again, I didn't come with one already in mind, but.
I have no like previous knowledge of this project.
Build succeeded.
So, yeah, so what you're gonna need to do is
Compressing, done, build
So let me
back.
see, yeah, I think there just needs to be a portion on it. farther along.
Basically.
It's gonna be, so what it does, Nelson
Good.
had this question, it saves stuff in memory, so you need to figure out NewYorkTimes.com, the layout of their document, or the layout of their HTML.
Okay,
right?
so there's
you
something
can
wrong.
get all the articles and all this, you're gonna want the link to the article, you're gonna want the headline section, you're gonna want the body.
Which
Those
I
three
think,
things, right?
yeah, which I think I have pretty much right here. Because,
Okay, so you're getting all the things then, right?
Headline
yeah,
summary.
because I went to the tech page specifically, it was a little easier to work with, and what I was the first time using more interested in.
Yeah.
So,
So you, okay, so you found the pattern to be able to create the site, you figure out how to parse their HTML so that you can get out a list of articles, right?
yeah, so it had a tag, the second has a tag, article, and then shows that it's the name of that tag. Href with the link, and then.
I'm trying to get to the log, but on the CLI and on the web interface, I'm looking at the logs. Getting a application error, it's imported in the log.
Delete the application, check
I did
your
that. Yeah, so it's something with the deployment, but I can't, I don't know if it's like a server, error, or database. Yeah.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to have the console that opened.
Yeah, so it's the HTML.
Are you using a database?
Yeah,
No,
you just gotta
no.
figure out how to
Okay.
scrape it.
So let me-
I have to figure out what pattern it is. Go and do that. So then you're gonna make a route that basically saves all those articles in memory, and you're gonna send that as a JSON response to the front. You don't save it as a database. Then if you're gonna use jQuery or whatever to make a list and show all this stuff, all the articles, each article is gonna have a button next to it that says save.
Right.
So you click that button, then it's gonna tell it save that article in the database. So you're gonna send back to the backend the article headline, the article link, and the article body.
So the ones we push to the database is the ones we're actually saving.
Are the ones you're actually saving. So you
Okay.
send all this stuff back to the backend, then the backend takes that and puts it into your one. It's gonna create a new record, and that's pretty much all it is to it. It's those three things. You scrape it, you're gonna save it in memory.
Do you know if this works like locally?
Yeah.
It works perfectly.
List of all this stuff. Then each one of them is has the save button. So when you click the save button, it'll send back. Just that article.
Oh.
Link.
You don't have a server.json.
As this is 40. So that's all there is to it. Let me see what they get.
But you're looking, see, here's, okay, that's, in your package.json, you're saying the main server is in a file called server.js. Yeah. So if you rename, you can do two things, either rename this to server.js, which is what I recommend, or in here, change it to portfolio.js. So to do that, change it, you can do it right now, see
I'm
that.
gonna stay here for the other hour.
Okay, is that okay?
Yeah, because then again, I didn't have any set questions, I don't expect you to stay.
Yeah. Sorry, I just thought most people wanted to leave early, so.
Well, I do too, but I need to get this thing done,
Yeah,
so.
okay. Yeah, keep going with it. Let me know if you have questions and we know once.
Thank you, John, appreciate it.
No problem. Good luck with it. Lucas, how you doing? You got really good.
I think I found the error, I don't know what the log thing is, but I think I found like the error in this code.
Let's get the logs set
I
up for
have
you.
an HTML.
Yeah, I tried Googling it.
Nothing
Nothing
there?
now. But I,
Can we try making a new repo? Can we try making a whole new repo and everything?
yeah, I just told him to update it because he was calling portfolio.js instead of server.js. And then his, what's it called? His, package, he was looking for server.js, so it wasn't finding a server. I'm assuming that's what the error is.
Portfolio. So did you change portfolio?
Yeah, I told him to change it to server.
Yeah, that's like the default for is to use server. If you want
Exactly.
something else, you have to change it.
Exactly. So just change it. Yeah, add, perfect. Add and commit and push. Well, no, 'cause are you the only one? It's your own project. Yeah, no, you don't. Just add the file.
Git push to Heroku.
No, he's doing it from, we tried deploying it from GitHub. So when you push it to GitHub, it automatically deploys to Heroku. Just to make sure there wasn't anything weird, like the Heroku CLI.
Okay. Yeah, we might want to get it sent back from,
Yeah.
just so that he'll be able to use it.
Yeah.
How did you set that up?
If you log into the web, like the actual web console, there's an
Oh,
option
let's
to
see.
deploy with
GitHub.
Yeah, and then you choose the repo and the branch, and then you can set up auto deployment. So when it pushes, there's a webhook, and it'll automatically pickle. So, perfect. Let's go back in here, and let's do a manual deployment just in case. All the way down.
Wait, did it work or not?
Yeah, that's what we're gonna redeploy. So deploy branch, and this way at least we can see your account is reached.
Yeah, I think you only have 5.
For the free tier? Really? Have you heard of anyone already into those ones? Try putting the app and see if it still deploys. No.
Let's just remake this whole repository. I think that's
The GitHub one or the Heroku?
the GitHub one, and then remake the app. Delete the app on Heroku, delete the repository, start again. I mean, unless this is.
Try connecting to the logs again one last time. Go to the.
Yeah, delete that whole app from Heroku. Okay, then do this. Go to your console. Okay, so that's the directory with the portfolio. Do the cd dot dot. CP L space LU tab F tab. Yeah. Okay. And then put a space LU tab. Yeah, tab. And then F tab, and then just put get rid of the slash, backspace, the slash, and then 2. Just put the number 2, enter. Okay, now do rm dash rf. Sorry, space rm. Space dash rf. You need a dash minus that.
Like space dash RF.
Dash RF.
There we go.
rm dash rf space lu tab rs. Yes, that. Enter.
Do you guys need help? No? Okay, okay. Make sure we're waiting on us.
What does that do? That removes. Hey, how come this isn't doing anything? Did the rm-rf?
It's loading. It took me a while to
remove.
Just even like do a Heroku login. It took me like 5 minutes. Just waiting.
There's something weird.
There it is.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
That was something weird was happening there. I don't know what. Okay. So now go to GitHub. Okay, so go back to this. Yeah, so delete that whole thing. Just portfolio, make it. So which is it? Where is it? This portfolio. Oh, okay. So yeah, so just delete that. Yeah, delete it. You do the Heroku in it for the.
No, he already had, when I looked at it, he already had.
Okay, so we're gonna set that part.
Yeah.
Okay, so remake that portfolio.
No, you?
Yeah, green on this. That goes. Okay, so now you're gonna check it out. So just copy this link here. Okay, so now come back to your terminal. And you're gonna type git space clone space fixed. Okay, so now it just copied that. It's empty. So now we just have to copy all this stuff back in. So to do that, it's cp space LU space or tab F tab and then backspace is going to do portfolio 2. So get rid of the slash and then number 2 tab tab yeah tab. Luca, okay, hit backspace again. Tab twice. Wait, can I see it? What happened to Lucas portfolio 2? Oh no, we deleted it.
Did not do the copy?
We didn't do the copy. Yeah, I thought I copied. I didn't see that you had that error there. So do we have another copy of this somewhere?
No, RM.
No, RM.rf. So we don't have another copy of it anywhere?
Of the portfolio?
Yeah, it should have. Yep. Oh, okay, cool.
But hold on.
Which one is what?
No, it's not the same one.
Okay, good. So, okay, here's what I want. Right. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. Go to, actually go back to your file browser. That would be easier. Go to the files. And then just copy all that stuff, and we're going to paste it into that new directory that you just created. You know where that is in your files. So, no, come back to your browser, then go to desktop. Yeah. Okay, paste. Really scared. You should consider getting a SSD drive. If you do that, your computer will be like a lot less. No, only like $50 or so.
So the SSD?
The SSD, yeah, that'll make it super.
The minimum requirements for when we started the boot camp said you wanted at least 500 gigs of storage available.
Yeah, but he has the storage. He just has a very slow hard drive. Yes, the speed.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying, if you got an SSD for $50, it's maybe 100.
Yeah, that's true, but no, you're much better off in small. You don't need that much storage. there's so much files? What do you have? What is the controller? And then what is the this? Why do you have